Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. The highway stretches deep into the night, where the hum of tires becomes a whisper and shadows seem to move on their own. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, the place where truth and terror share the same road. Tonight, we bring you 9 true creepiest trucker horror stories encounters pulled from lonely highways, silent diners, and miles that never felt quite empty. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help us keep driving through the dark. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. He took the plains westbound after midnight, where the land opened like a blank page and the sky forgot how to end. His name was Caleb, a steady driver with years of quiet nights behind him, the kind of calm that comes from 1,000 empty miles and 1,000 careful deliveries. He hauled produce this time, a reefer unit humming in the background like a low, reassuring note. The highway ran straight, marker after marker, the kind of stretch where a glance left could be mistaken for a glance right. Nothing but wind, fence, stubble fields, and the occasional farmhouse window glowing gold. The CB radio sat soft at volume 3, a companion more than a tool. Channel 19 was sleepy, an occasional check-in, a yawn of static, someone asking about weather down 3 exits. Caleb let the drone of tires through the cab floor and the steady tick of his turn signal when he made a slow pass on an overnight tanker. His thermos was half full. A crumpled grocery list rode the dash next to a plastic saint his mother once pressed into his palm during a Sunday lunch. He didn't think of luck much, but he liked the way the little figure didn't rattle. Past midnight, a sign flashed. Way station open. It surprised him. He had expected it to be closed, because the last few times through this area at night, he'd sailed past without a second thought. The green arrow burned steady over the shoulder, so he signaled, eased toward the ramp, and followed the white lines up to a lit rectangle of pavement. Moths beat themselves soft against the glass of the office. Yellow light spilled out enough to make a small island in the dark. He rolled onto the scale and stopped on the painted queue. The reefer hummed. The printer in the window chattered. The sign said, "Proceed inside." He set the brake and climbed down, the night air dry and flat, the sense of space so large it felt like a presence. Inside, the office smelled like paper and dust warmed by old bulbs. A coffee pot sat on a warmer half a pot left, as if someone had stepped away a second ago, not long at all. But no one stood at the counter. There was a bell, one of those chrome service bells. He touched it lightly. It didn't ring. He tapped it again, and the sound came out a fraction of a second late, as if the room had to think about it first. A slip of paper slid from the printer, and he reached over, glanced down at the numbers. Gross, Axel, fine. The license printed across the top was his, but reversed, like it had been seen through a mirror. He frowned at it, more curious than concerned, then shrugged. A misprint wasn't uncommon. He called out a hello. A chair creaked in the back room, like someone adjusting, but no one answered. He signed a clipboard left on the counter and left the slip anyway, because that was the rhythm of things. In the lot, an old day cab idled with no driver in sight. Its amber markers blinked like sleepy eyes. He climbed back into his own cab, checked his mirrors, checked the sky, and rolled forward. The scale dipped under him with that small feeling he liked. Ship heavy, balanced, steady. Back on the highway, the mile markers started up again like beads on a string. 181, 182, 183. The fields were empty. A windmill turned once or twice, and then forgot to keep going. He sipped coffee. The CB crackled a little, and then went quiet. Ahead, a billboard announced a diner with pie. Just ahead, next exit. And the photo showed a slice under glossy light. He had seen it the last time he passed through. It was way off the mark. That diner sat 2 hours down the line, not next exit. Advertising played tricks in the night. The mile marker 184 slipped by, and time settled. He took another slow breath, rolled his shoulders, and glanced at the dash clock. It said 1:13. He didn't remember it ticking over to that exact minute, but he wasn't keeping score. He passed a culvert, where someone had stuck a reflector in the ditch for fun. Then another sign, "Way station open." He blinked. The same green arrow, the same feel of an invitation that was not quite a command. He checked the mirror. No one behind him, no one close in front. He glanced at the clock again, still 1:13, and decided maybe he'd misread the signs earlier. Maybe there were two stations, close together, and he'd stumbled into a rare stretch of bureaucracy. He took the ramp. The lot laid out before him like a photocopy of the last one. Same arrangement of concrete, same office with moths orbiting the glass. The printer chattered before he had fully stopped. He eased onto the scale, watched the sign, waited, proceed inside. It was mildly funny now. He set the brake, climbed down, and went into that same warm paper smell. The coffee pot looked the same as before, same half pot, same ring of dark coffee around the hot plate. The bell on the counter sat in the same spot, and when he pressed it, the ring came late again, like a breath behind his own breath. The printer spit a slip. He picked it up. The numbers were the same. The misprint was the same. His plate reversed as if viewed in a window. He turned it over, expecting a second page he'd missed. The back was blank. In the corner of the room, a chair gave that same little creak. Caleb's heartbeat stayed where it was. He didn't speed it. He didn't slow it. He wasn't someone who jumped to conclusions. He placed the slip next to the first one. He waited a second longer, then stepped out into the lot and scanned the two lanes. His own truck idled with its marker lights a faint orange glow. Across the way, the old day cab idled again, the same white paint, the same faded company name ghosting the door. A moth crawled the inside of the office window in a slow circle. He could swear it was the same one. He climbed in and sat with his hands on the wheel, not turning it yet. He took a breath and turned the CB up one notch. The speaker hissed gently, and then a voice came through, flat and familiar. "You're good to go, Caleb." He reached for the mic on habit, thumb hovering, then stopped. He recognized the voice. It was his own, in the sloppy, casual tone he used at goof early hours when he tossed a simple thanks at a helpful night clerk. He hadn't said those words. Not tonight. The reefer hummed. The clock said 1:13. He put the truck in gear and rolled forward, like everything was ordinary, because ordinary was the safest lane to ride. The ramp fell back into the main line, and the highway waited. He drifted through the gears and kept it smooth, the way that made him feel the whole machine settle around him like a jacket. Mile marker 184 returned. He watched it pass on the right shoulder, its white numbers crisp. The billboard with pie appeared again. This time he counted fence posts between the sign and the nearest utility pole. He didn't know why. It felt like an anchor he could throw into quiet water and see if it hit the bottom. He counted 27. He checked his weather app out of a new habit, looked at the little moving radar squares, and saw nothing special. He looked at his phone clock. It said 1:13. "Any westbound got eyes on that way station?" a voice asked, tinny and lazy. A beat. The same voice again. It felt like hearing your own whisper in a room when you thought you were alone. He turned the set down a notch, not off. The drone of the road grew louder, the reefer's steady note steadier still. A set of taillights appeared far ahead, two red dots hovering and sinking with the small waves of the pavement. They didn't gain or shrink relative to him. It was like they were matched to his throttle without meaning to be. He touched the wheel to the right, then left, the lightest of corrections, and the truck held course as if the earth itself kept it aligned. Up ahead, another green arrow glowed. Way station open. He could have laughed, if he were the kind to laugh at little oddities. Instead, he took the ramp again because ignoring the sign felt like a bigger sort of mistake, and because part of him wanted to test a pattern before claiming it existed. The lot glowed. The office waited. He rolled onto the scale. The printer chattered. Inside, the coffee pot held the same half pot now probably cooked to bitterness. The bell rang half a beat late. The slip arrived with his license backward and the timestamp stripped of a minute, and when the chair creaked in back, it did so on cue. Caleb set both slips down side by side and watched the little curl at their corners mirror each other. He lifted his eyes to the wall clock. It showed 1:13. The second hand was missing. He didn't remember whether he'd seen it before. He walked outside and stood on the concrete a moment, not to stretch but to be very gentle with the night, to touch it with his lungs, and see if it tasted like a different place. The wind made a low ribbon sound through a chain-link fence. Far out in the fields, something metallic clinked, not in warning or in menace, just in the random way loose things comment on passing breezes. He tapped 2 fingers on the side of his truck, the small affection drivers give to their machines, and climbed back up. Dispatch might have been awake. He considered calling, but what would he say? He started the truck forward and rejoined the silent river of asphalt. The trainer he'd had years ago, a careful older man who wore a baseball cap with a sun-faded logo and carried peppermints in his shirt pocket, had told him, "The planes sometimes try on their echo in the small hours. Don't let your rhythm get caught. Change something. Make the night take a fresh look." It sounded like superstition at the time. One more friendly quirk passed between drivers. It came to him now with the clarity of a road sign right where you need it. He let the reefer hum and then clicked it off. At once, the cab breathed a deeper quiet, the kind with a soft pressure to it, like the air arrived at once to listen. The CB hiss felt sharper for a second, then returned to a blanket whisper. He counted slowly, not numbers, but exits he knew by memory. The one with the single pump under a shaking light, the one with the boarded church, the one with the row of mailboxes leaning as if they tire of being straight. He tapped the steering wheel 3 times. He reached over and nudged the dash clock ahead to 1:14. The moment felt small, and then it felt like a thread tugging a heavier curtain. The road remained itself. The next marker, if it came again, would do what it always did. He let the reefer kick back on and felt the sound fit back into place like a drop stitch picked up. He drove past the place where the culvert should be and saw it wasn't there. In its place, a slant of ditch lined with grass he hadn't noticed earlier. The billboard with the pie stood a fraction further from its pole than before. No, it was the angle from the road that changed. Subtle as a pawn moved 1 square on a blackboard. He would not have noticed if he hadn't tipped the clock. He breathed out and didn't smile because this didn't feel like victory. It felt like stepping from a tight hallway into a wider one. The CB broke the quiet. "Westbound, you dropping that produce into Lawrence or carrying it past?" The voice was friendly, featureless. The kind of voice you might not recall later. He left the mic on its clip. He wasn't in the mood to feed any loops that wanted to chew their own tail. He took the next exit, which announced a town name that neither his atlas nor his memory offered up. The sign was newer than the posts, as if somebody had replaced only part of the old with something bright. The ramp curved under a wooden overpass where a single fluorescent tube glowed like a trapped ghost. At the bottom of the ramp, a little diner sat like an idea someone refused to give up. 1 door, 5 windows, 2 neon letters, still working in a 10-letter word. He eased the truck onto the shoulder, set hazards, and left the engine on, because there was no reason to turn it off except to prove something he didn't need to prove. The glass door opened with a chime that sounded like a spoon tapped on the edge of a jar. Inside, the counter had 4 stools, the waitstaff probably 2 during the daytime and 1 at night. Tonight it was a man who looked like he'd been there long enough to carve his name into the formica with a fingernail. He nodded like he'd been expecting this exact number of people. 1. "Coffee?" the man said. His tone wore no surprise. Caleb nodded. "Please." He took the middle stool, because the middle was where you wait, without declaring anything. The coffee came in a thick cup, with a chip in the rim, the size of a sunflower seed. Steam rose straight and then disappeared, as if the ceiling was a field. He checked his phone the way people check themselves in reflection after a long drive, a small confirmation. It still said 1:13. The diner's clock near the pie case also read 1:13, and it also had no second hand. The place smelled of warm dough, and something cinnamon, maybe not much, a memory of cinnamon. "Road quiet?" the man asked, wiping the same circle on the counter in a way that said he wasn't really trying to clean it. It was a motion to keep time from clumping. "Like it's waiting," Caleb said, before he could choose whether or not to put a word to it. He didn't talk about the way stations. He didn't talk about the slips. The room felt like it might repeat words out loud if you gave it something to work with. The man nodded. Not like he agreed, but like the word was okay being in the air. You're tuned to it, that's all. The hum behind you that keeps the road from losing track of you. If it ever gets curious, you change the way you walk to the truck. That's all. Folks forget they can do that. He said it the way someone might remark on a patch of ice. There, it's there, watch. Caleb sipped the coffee. It was decent. He thought about paying and leaving the exact change, because that felt like a way to prevent a scene where small bills got slippery. He placed 2 bills under the cup, and the man touched the register. It didn't open. He looked at it with a calm affection, hit the side with a knuckle, and the drawer slid open half an inch. He didn't force the rest. He left it that way, and tucked the bills underneath. "Be seeing you down the line," the man said, and it sounded like yes and also like a kind of polite refusal of prophecy. Caleb thanked him and returned to his truck. The hazards ticked, and as he reached for the handle, the tick matched the CB hiss for a breath, then missed it again by a hair. That small misalignment made him feel safer than perfect synchrony would have. On the main line, the markers climbed to 185. The wind shifted the slightest degree toward his left. He could feel it as a friendly hand on the side of the trailer. He let out a breath he hadn't wanted to measure and watched the east pick up a tone the color of watered milk. Could have been the first whisper of morning. Could have been his eyes inventing hope. He let it be without forcing it. The next way station showed closed in orange letters. He didn't look over as he passed. The CB spoke once more with the list-reading cadence he remembered from one bad weather night when snow closed half a state, and the radio became a lifeline. A series of call signs, then names, then a set of towns. His own name came through twice, a little nothing they sometimes did on long nights when everyone grew temporary family. He kept his hands at 10 and 2 and did not reach for the mic. The listing stopped, as if it had fulfilled a gentle promise. By the time the sky knew how to lighten, he was 27 miles off where he had expected to be, but the odometer made sense, and the fuel gauge agreed. He rolled into a receiver where the forklift crew wore hoodies and slow smiles. The receiving clerk looked up from his sheet and squinted at the clock on the wall and then at Caleb, like maybe they'd met somewhere but not at a place you'd explain in a form. The stamp thumped 427 across a line that didn't care about what the night had been doing an hour ago. He parked along the chain link to finish his log, the reefer finally quiet, a hiss of air brakes rolling out like a sigh. He took out his phone and thumbed through the dashcam clips, not sure why. Maybe to anchor the night to a record. On a clip from a way station ramp, the second one, or the first? The audio picked up a voice at the edge of the static. The way a different frequency sometimes bleeds in if you angle the mic just so. "Don't weigh," the voice whispered, as if it were a friendly warning not to complicate a simple thing. It was his vocal shape, but it sounded as tiny and far away as your voice does when heard through a closed door. He didn't make a habit of telling versions of strange nights in a way that begged for belief. He let this one live in the place where drivers kept little should-have-beens, shouldn't-haves, almosts and near misses, and tiny moments when the road reminded you it could bend its own rules. In the weeks that followed, he took a slightly different line past the plains at night, not because he was scared, but because there are stretches that appreciate polite distance when they've shown you how they like to fold. On certain nights, usually when the wind traveled steady and low and 3 states of grass moved as one, he would, without thinking too hard, nudge his dash clock a minute ahead, then return it. He'd tap the wheel. He'd cut the reefer for a breath and bring it back. He'd think of a moth circling a warm light, and how sometimes it is kindness to step away from the window a moment. Most nights, the miles behaved, the markers counted like they were supposed to, and the billboards stayed in their lanes. But now and then, when the CB fell quiet in a careful way that meant listening rather than silence, he could hear under the hiss a tone that matched his reefer almost exactly, like the road hummed back just to say it still knew where he was. Story number 2. She took the mountain the way careful people fold a letter edge to edge, no rush, the crease made by patience. Her name was Mara, and she had run Black Timber Pass for years, enough to respect the wind that prowled the ridgeline and the kind of fog that turned headlights into soft halos. She hauled a flatbed tonight, a steady weight of quarry equipment tarped tight and strapped in a pattern she could have traced with her eyes closed. The engine brake whisper sang on the descents, a sound as familiar to her as her own breathing. The warning signs started 20 miles out, gusts at the notch, advisory for high-profile vehicles. "That's me," she said to no one. because saying it folded the thought into something manageable. The CB murmured with weather talk, drivers trading mile markers and tea about where the wind leaned hardest. She kept the volume low and let the voices be like a radio on a neighbor's porch, there but not intruding. The eastern sky had no intention of changing yet. The world felt like the underside of a blue tarp, everything there, but dimmed. The road climbed in lazy switchbacks, guardrails blinking small reflectors that nodded. Yes. 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 You're still online. She knew the pullouts, knew the runaway ramps, their gravel raked into ridges like combed hair, and knew which stretches asked for a lighter foot on the throttle. The kind of night that asked for steady hands and no boasting. At mile 58, the wind decided to show an opinion. It pressed the trailer. A gentle argument at first, and then a firm suggestion. Mara eased a touch more wheel into it, the way she'd been taught, not fighting, just answering. The straps thrummed once like plucked strings and settled. She checked her mirrors and saw only her own markers scanning the curve behind, like a line of fireflies with a mission. The radio popped, not in a dramatic way. It simply found a voice as if it had been waiting for its cue. Westbound heavy at 5 to 8 and climbing hold for escort. The tone was unbothered, like the drift of a weather forecast. She reached for the mic because what else would someone do when an invisible hand meant to help reached out? The old habits kept her words simple. Say again for the westbound heavy. Hold for escort, the voice repeated. Pilot 7 has you. Mara didn't remember calling for a pilot car. She hadn't booked one. The load was heavy but not oversize. Still, the mountain sometimes brought surprises that weren't problems if you treated them like company. She touched the brakes just enough to read as a nod to whoever had decided to find her and drifted to the long turnout at mile 59. The gravel there was full of history, and long, slow curves told stories in tire marks about folks who had faced a gust and negotiated with it rather than tried to win. A smear of amber light slid into view around the bend, soft and steady. A small car, a sedan older than most. Its paint a color that might have once been white, eased up in front of her, and settled into a pace just under hers. An unmarked light bar glowed on its roof. Nothing showy, just two amber rectangles pulsing an alternate rhythm like a calm heartbeat. No magnetic signs on the doors, no company logo. The car gave a courtesy blink of a turn signal and pulled back left, aligning in front of her lane with a comfortable buffer. The radio breathed. You're good, westbound. Stay with me to the notch. Winds throwing shoulders. She watched the car take the curve the way you'd watch someone carry a teacup over a carpet. No wasted motion, no fear of spilling. She eased off the brake, found her gear, and followed. The amber lights ahead weren't bright enough to blind. They were bright enough to say, we'll be here. The mile markers shifted up. 50, 9, 60. A sign made a suggestion about chains. Another sign pointed out a scenic overlook that was only scenic in daylight. The pilot car's taillights slowed near the overlook, encouraging the same from her, and the radio murmured, lulls run every 90 seconds here. We'll catch one. She waited, her foot resting on the brake, as if the pedal were a living thing you were gentle with. The wind moved in a wide, curving way, like the breath of an animal sleeping near the trees. It pushed. It released. It pushed again. She counted without trying to count breaths, blinks, the soft thump of her heart in her ears, and when the air relaxed as promised, the amber lights ahead brightened once. Not a command, a nod, and the sedan rolled forward. She went with it. Past the overlook, the road leaned toward the rock face and away from open air. Rockfall nets clung to the cliff, like silver lace. She glanced up into the dark, not because she expected anything, but because drivers who make it through learn to respect gravity without giving it stage time. The pilot car's lights threw small reflections in the metal mesh. For a second they looked like eyes blinking in a row, friendly and not quite focused. She breathed and kept the wheel. At mile 61, the radio voice spoke again. Split ahead. Take the left of 4. It said it as if left of 4 were a normal instruction. She pictured the road ahead, and sure enough, the lane widened near a construction zone into a series of choices, the way mountain roads sometimes split themselves for a season. 2 lanes grew to 3, grew to 4. On the right, a striped lane drifted into a closed shoulder. On the left, an old loop rejoined with an odd angle. The amber lights ahead took a line she might not have chosen on her own, threading the second lane from the left, neither hugging the barrier nor flirting with the paint. It felt right the moment she committed to it, like picking the correct key from a ring without reading the labels. Cones lined the far edges. Their reflective bands caught the pilot's lights and answered back with a shy gleam. As the convoy eased between them, the cones seemed to straighten, as if standing a little taller for a moment as trucks passed, the way people fix their posture when a doorway frames them. "Back door clean," the radio said in a voice that could have been any seasoned driver who had spent a decade talking to strangers with care. The phrase was old school. Folks didn't say it much anymore. It landed on her ears like a word from a different calendar. They reached the rock shed, a concrete tunnel built to let the mountain shrug rocks without worrying about who might be beneath. The pilot car's lights played across the low ceiling and turned the world into straight lines and echoed sound. Her engine note rode up the walls and folded back. The radio cut a little, then returned with a small, patient hum, like it was thinking. On the far side, the night opened again, and the wind stepped near quickly, as if it had been waiting just outside the roofline to remind everyone who lived here full time. The notch lay ahead, 2 shoulders of stone with a gap between, the road threaded like needlework. Folks called it a notch. On the map, it had a long name from a surveyor with tidy script. "We'll hold before the gap," the voice said. "Count to 18 with your hands open." They pulled into a short turnout with a view of the drop beyond that was more suggestion than sight. Darkness layered over darkness. Mara set the brake and rubbed her hands once, not to warm them, but to give them something to be doing. The amber lights lit the interior of her cab in a warm, almost honey color. The clock on her dash ticked from 2:14 to 2:14 again. It might have been a trick of her eyes, or a trick of the mountain. Either way, she let it be. She opened her hands in her lap, palms up as instructed, and counted the slow way you do when you don't want the numbers to trip over one another. Halfway through, a soft knock touched the outside of her door. Not a fist, a tap, like a polite reminder that someone was nearby. She glanced in the mirror. The pilot car sat where it Saturday. No one walked between them. Tap, 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 tap. A rhythm. 7 beats, a pause, then 3, then 1. Wind? It was the kind of wind that made small wires hum and loose chains ghost speak. She listened, instead of looking, because sometimes your eyes want stories, your ears won't approve. 7, 3, 1. She let the numbers pass through her, and not stick, like cars that turn off at an exit you don't need. "Go," the radio said, and the amber lights slid forward. The gust had settled for now, like a restless thing that decided to sit while it thought. Mara released the brake and eased with them into the notch. She centered her brain more than she centered the truck, the way someone walking a narrow board centers breath rather than feet. The wind stepped out, had its say, and then thought better of any drama. Across the gap, the road cupped the mountain again. A sense of warmth arrived, improbable at this hour, and at this height, as if unseen trees were exhaling. It was nothing you could point to. It was something you could feel. Mileage moved the way it does when tension lightens 63, 64, and soon the grade changed its mind about going up. The long drop on the west slope began with that faint pull on the stomach that says downhill in a more honest voice than signs do. The pilot car angled toward a gravel apron where a wooden sign with bullet holes announced the old name of a station that had once sold postcards and coffee and the kind of souvenirs that collect dust in boxes after they've done their duty. Living on someone's fridge. A single fluorescent tube glowed in the window like a full moon that had learned to hold still. "Chain up area," the radio said, though the asphalt was dry. "You don't need 'em tonight. We pause here." Mara set the brakes. With the engine idling, she stepped down and put her boots in the gravel. The air smelled like pine and stone that had been warmed during the day and now quietly let go of the heat. Her headlamp caught no footprints except the tracks of her own tires and the fade-out of someone who'd been through here when the dust was damp in a different season. If the pilot car had rolled in, it should have left a clear signature in the stones. Small, neat. The surface looked untouched. She looked up at the old building, the hand-painted letters neat and faded, the window glowing. Summit Station. On the door, a paper notice curled under Scotch tape read, "Closed Mondays and most nights." The kinds of words that leave room for exceptions. She didn't try the door. She stood a moment, listened to the truck's slow metal clicks as cooling parts tucked into themselves. The wind moved something small, maybe a tin sign, and it replied with a soft ting, 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 a code that belonged to old days. 7, 3, 1. She didn't count on purpose, but numbers sometimes count themselves when they want to and leave you out of it. Her breath steamed, a tiny fog that broke apart without taking anything with it. Back in the cab, she placed her hands on the wheel and looked at her own reflection in the side window, faint and layered over trees. "Appreciate it," she said softly into the cab air, because gratitude in closed spaces has a way of finding its route. Left of 2 at the split, the radio suggested as if someone had read her mind about the descending lanes. The pilot car's lights shifted forward. Patient. She picked up her mic and pressed the button not because she expected an answer, but because ritual makes its own reality. "You? Out of a base, Pilot 7? She asked. Silence returned with the kind of politeness that says it's listening even if it has nothing to say. Then a thread of voice. "Summit Station when it was open." The kind of answer that is both information and not. They rolled down together, the alpine darkness lifting a hair's breadth at a time. The road offered those long, sighing curves that let you see your future a few seconds before you arrive. Her engine brake did its steady work, a whisper that had meaning. The amber lights ahead dipped and rose with the road, like a small boat on a black river. Once, when they passed under a truss bridge where snow sometimes hides and lingers in March, the pilot slowed and centered, and she centered with it. For a moment, the beams of her headlights and the cold steel lines of the bridge made a simple, beautiful drawing that belonged only to whoever happened to be here to notice. The grade eased. They reached the place where deer used to favor the median before a low fence asked them to try elsewhere. The pilot car's lights blinked twice, an old code for clear road or thank you, depending on who you learned from. And then the little sedan took the off-ramp toward a viewpoint turnout. It went up the small hill behind a line of firs and paused where a person might stop to take a photo of the valley in the day. The amber blinked once more like a wave. She needed fuel farther down. She kept rolling because sometimes that's what you do when a strange courtesy has looped around you. You accept it and you don't grab at it. At mile 74, a modern overhead sign beamed up to the second information about crosswinds. Advisory ended, it said. Safe speed. Traffic normal. The radio returned to its previous life of chatter about coffee quality in a truck stop someone loved out of habit. At the base of the hill, Mara pulled into a station with a dozen diesel lanes and the ghost of burnt toast in the air. A teenage cashier with sleepy eyes and a knit cap that tried to be a conversation started to ring her up and then paused. "You come off Black Timber?" he asked. She nodded. "Guy came through an hour ago, said he followed an escort down. Said it was like following a porch light. He used that exact phrase." The kid shrugged. He didn't look spooked. He looked like someone dropping a pebble into a fountain to see how the water enjoyed the company. She took her receipt and stepped back into the cold that was less now. The eastern margin of the sky considered the idea of being a color. Birds she couldn't see answered questions she hadn't heard. On her way back to the cab, she passed the bulletin board by the door, where Lost Dog notices shared space with tax help flyers. An old paper hung under a thumbtack with the edges furred from hands. Notice to drivers. During advisories, contact Pilot 7 or Pilot 9 on 17 for assistance over the notch. Below that, written in pencil that had smudged a little, if line's quiet, wait for a lull. Open your hands and count to 18. Her truck's chrome woke with the first hint of dawn and painted the ground with a stripe of pale light. She climbed in, put her palms on the wheel in routine, and glanced at her dash clock. It offered 3:27, which could have been right or could have been the mountain on her mind tricking her sense of it. She didn't care which. She pulled out and found the highway and let the road be easy again. Mid-morning, when the world wore its full colors, she called the district office just to be the version of herself that liked to fact-check the unusual. The voice on the other end, cheerful, helpful. A person enjoying a morning coffee told her there were no nighttime escort services on the pass. Not officially. Advisories posted. Pilot cars were used for oversized moves by appointment. She thanked the person and left out the part about numbers tapping on her door. The day had no reason to carry that. That afternoon, parked in a lineup with other rigs, gentle snores rising like slow waves from various sleepers, she walked the length of her flatbed, and checked every strap with a hand that knew each one's small differences. The equipment beneath slept the sleep of well-tied cargo. On her driver's side rear tire, in a faint ghost of white, someone had chalked a small line. Not a full mark, just a short slash like an exhale. It looked like nothing. It looked like the kind of something you notice because you've been taught to notice small somethings. She ran a finger over it. Chalk came away in a whisper. Out past the fence, a chain hung loose on a gate and knocked gently in the afternoon breeze. Ting. Ting, ting, ting. Ting. She stepped back into the shade of her trailer and listened. And when the rhythm lined back up with the one from the notch, she nodded in a way no one saw and put the chalk dust to her thumb, then pressed it softly onto the dash, a smudge just for her. That night, after another stretch of miles, she stopped at a diner shaped like a shoebox at the edge of a town that kept its neon signs in good repair. Coffee came hot, pie came generous, and the cook hummed along to a radio above the griddle. An older driver 2 stools down watched football in the reflection of the pie case and said, as if continuing a conversation from last week, sometimes that pass sends out a porch light if you don't talk back to the wind too loud. He said it matter of fact, with the sort of certainty that doesn't care if anyone believes it. Had it once. Followed a car with lights no brighter than a candle, and felt like I was in a living room the whole way. Mara smiled without showing teeth and said, that sounds all right. He nodded. The pie was very good. The coffee warmed hands as well as stomach. A chalkboard near the register listed soups. Someone had erased and rewritten the word barley 3 times until it looked like a sketch. On a small corner of the board, in the handwriting of someone who didn't like to be seen, were 3 numbers. 7, 3, 1. Could have been a price for something that no longer sold. Could have been a child's game score. Could have been the sort of little life left by a knight that had chosen to be kind. She wondered later what she could tell that would make sense to someone who had never met winds with opinions or radios with memory. She decided it wasn't about explanations. It was about the way a truck settles under you when the road approves. The way amber light ahead can feel like company. The way old services might not be entirely gone just because the sign says closed. She slept that night in the truck with the curtain drawn to a line that let in exactly 1 star. The chain at the fence moved when a small breeze found it, and from her bunk she could hear it count without asking for permission. From then on, when advisories posted, she still read the updates and checked the anemometer display some drivers like to keep on the dash. She still drove with care, but when a small sedan with an amber bar eased into her lane without logos and with purpose, she didn't argue. She followed, at a respectful distance, and kept her hands open when told to. On mornings after, she sometimes found chalk dust on her thumb that she did not remember acquiring. It made her smile the way finding a forgotten bill in your pocket does. Not a lot, not saving the day, just enough to say there are small kindnesses organized by the road that has seen everyone's hurry and decided, once in a while, to send a porch light. Story number 3. He ran the river route on a wet night that pressed rain like a whisper on the windshield, a steady fine thread that made the wipers work without hurry. His name was Hector, and he hauled a dry van full of paper goods bound for a warehouse that kept its lights on all night, the way some places do to remind anyone passing that business goes on even when most windows are dark. The highway along the floodplain was wide and even, painted bright enough that the lines felt new. On his right, the river lay a few miles off, unseen but present in the way a low place breathes. He kept to a measured pace, the sort of steady speed that lets a truck feel like a boat at a dock, not straining, just tied to motion. His ELD chimed a small reminder about hours left, the gentle tone everyone knows by now, more polite than an alarm. The kind that keeps a driver honest. He had exactly enough to make the receiver with a margin for 1 short stop. The CB murmured low with weather checks and a couple of drivers comparing notes on coffee at a truck plaza he'd passed earlier. He didn't need more coffee. He had a thermos by his right knee, half gone and still warm, and a pair of old country songs downloaded on his phone that he didn't play yet because the night had its own rhythm. A lit message board ahead blinked against the mist. High water. On US 24. Use posted detour. He leaned forward a degree. Not to read better, but to let the thought settle. Floodplain roads learn moods quickly. He signaled into the right lane and rolled, careful and untroubled, until the orange signs began. Road closed 6 miles ahead. Trucks follow detour. Arrow left, arrow right in a series that made the direction unambiguous. A TMA truck with a folded attenuator sat angled across a ramp shoulder like a sleeping animal. Its arrow board pulsed a calm left. The flares were electric, no smoke, just steady red stars in the rain. He took the exit where the detour asked him to. ELD counting time, his odometer counting miles, everything normal and recorded. The county road wore fresh gravel near its edges and a slick gloss of rain on the center stripe. A volunteer firehouse slid past on the left 4 bays, the kind of place where the poles had dents from decades of gloved hands. Across from it, a park with a gazebo, roof beaded with water, a single string of white lights still strung for an event that had long ended. His headlights brushed a sign that said, "Welcome to Leonard," pebble-textured letters on a concrete base with little marigolds planted in front. He didn't know Leonard. He could imagine it in the daytime, neat streets, and a diner that closed early on Tuesdays. The detour arrows pointed him south, then west, then south again, a lopsided grid. The beauty of the Midwest is that it will give you a clean grid when there's land to do it. He followed the orange like a candlelit path at a church service, the sort of route where someone with a careful hand set each sign at a height that matched the last. The rain laid itself down a little thicker for a few minutes, and then thinned, a breath in and out. At the far edge of Leonard, now fields again. Fence lines and silos with caps like chess pieces, a water tower rose. Leonard painted across it in big black letters, with a small emblem of a cornstalk underneath. The tower passed on his right, and he took the next turn at an arrow that wanted him to swing long to clear a tight corner. He did. The truck moved like it respected curbs and telephone poles, because it did. 2 miles on, another "Welcome to Leonard" sign appeared. It wasn't unheard of for a town to have 2, one for each border. He passed this one with a nod he didn't really need to make, and kept the speed just under any reason for a local officer to be curious. A white farmhouse with a porch lamp on, like an eye, reappeared after a gentle rise. The same lamp, the same posture of a rocking chair left facing the road. The rain tucked itself into his headlights and flew across. A kingdom of light specks, then was gone. Then again when he met another patch. He rolled, obeying each orange rectangle. At the 3rd water tower with the same lettering, the same cornstalk emblem, the same small streak of rust arcing from a bolt near the top, Hector felt the first tug of an idea. He checked his odometer and his ELD and his map overlay on his phone. The odometer said what it should for the time he'd been moving. The ELD ticked normal minutes. The map showed a gray line along county routes, sent there by his GPS after it had shrugged and accepted the detour as truth. The gray line bent to match his turns. It did not warn him. His CB remained a background voice in a room down the hall, someone telling someone else about a blown fuse on a reefer unit 2 states away. He eased into a turnout at a grain elevator to check his straps habitually, even though a dry van needs nothing like a flatbed's attention. He set the brake and listened to the rain change as it hit different surfaces. Concrete here, corrugated metal there, the clean note of a puddle when drops fall into a shallower pool. The grain elevator's office light glowed behind a blind. No movement. A soda machine on the wall displayed a soft red 312. The soda selection showed pictures with slight sun fade. He stepped down into the wet and looked at the footprint he made, and the ones that weren't there. He wasn't spooked. He was thorough. Back on the lane, the detour signs felt more particular. They sat a little too square to the road, a little too plumb, as if someone had taken extra pride arranging them. The arrow boards on the trucks at each turn looked a tiny bit older than he had expected. The paint on the housings, a touch chalky. The lenses a particular shade of amber not seen much since the last decade. None of it was wrong by itself. Together, the taste in the mouth changed, the way coffee tells you something about the pot it came from. A pickup truck with a county seal rolled past going the other way with a rack of cones in back. In the second it took to pass, he saw no water beading on its sides. Either it had just been wiped, which is odd for a work truck in the rain, or it was as dry as a memory. He thought of nothing then. He kept the line. When he reached the next 4-way, the flagger sign, the round stop divided by slow paddle, stood on its own, mounted on a tripod, its slow side turned toward him, reflective. There was no flagger. A yellow hard hat sat on the base. Rain shelled off of it, as if the plastic wanted to be a drum. He idled a moment, then did what the sign asked. He slowed to a creep and proceeded. The tripod did not turn to show stop to anyone else. There was no one else. Past a row of cottonwoods, the road dipped toward a low, unseen creek and rose again. The crest gave him another Leonard sign, the same roughness in the concrete base, the same marigolds in front, healthy despite the season. He noted the little marigolds without wanting to note them, because you don't expect flowers to be in a loop with you. He keyed the mic. Any locals with eyes on the US 24 detour by the river? Seeing multiple Leonard signs? Might be standard. Just checking. His voice sounded like it always did, calm, a hint of late-night gravel. The CB answered with a short measure of static and nothing else. Even the two chatterers from earlier seemed to have wandered off to their deliveries in silence. The thought came not as fear, but as a simple mechanical test, like tapping a gauge. On the next arrow, he did not take the suggested right. He passed it and continued straight. 1 block. Nothing dramatic followed. The world did not tilt. He reached a brick building with a mural of a train engine painted by a patient hand, the kind of thing small towns commission because they love their own. He had seen this exact mural 3 turns ago. The painted train's number was 4109. He had not looked at it before, not really. Now it mattered because he knew it. There it was again, 4109. The rain was gentle enough that its sheen on the paint looked like a finish. He made a left, and another Leonard water tower introduced itself as if they were strangers, and below it a roadwork arrow leaned on a sawhorse and pointed into a line of amber posts that he had already threaded. He let the truck roll. It felt like following a road inside an old song that repeats a verse you forgot you knew. He pulled into the gravel apron of a closed general store with a porch under an overhang, the kind of place that posts a chalkboard with soup specials on weekdays. Tonight the chalkboard was clean. A single bait and tackle sign swung slow under the eave and made a whisper knock sound that didn't quite sync with the drops hitting the porch steps. He set his brakes and shut the engine off to hear the night. The quiet that arrived was never complete road noise in the distance. The rain's small words, a transformer hum by the 2-lane, but it clarified. Somewhere, an arrow board kept its rhythm. Left, 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 steady, like a heartbeat 1 mountain over. He took his phone, opened the map layers, pinched and zoomed. The gray line of his path traced a gently tangled square. There was an error message over the river. Flood data unavailable. He pressed the GPS refresh and watched the little blue triangle blink and settle. It landed on Leonard. The map offered no second Leonard and no third. Just the one. He thought about 13-foot clearances, about bridge rehabs that come in the middle of the night, about how many small moving parts go into a detour, and how sometimes good pieces wear mismatched clothing from different years. All reasonable. He started the engine again and made his next decision slower, not to show hesitation, but to put his mind in a round, better gear. At the 5th water tower, a difference emerged. This one wore a string of winter lights around the catwalk even though winter was past. Small, white dots in a ring. They were on. The rain turned those dots into small, bright stars. He had not seen that on the earlier towers. In the yard below, a chain-link gate gaped open with a padlock hanging neatly on its hinge. The sight of that padlock at rest, and not in use, nudged him. Not everything matched. He decided on an anchor. Across from the tower stood a brick post office, lights off, flag wet and down. A bulletin board under glass held flyers, lost cat, a holiday bake sale, a notice about leaf pickup. On the bottom right corner, a map of emergency flood routes showed a thick blue marker line pulling out of town to higher ground. The route on the flyer did not match the orange signs. He couldn't read the tiny street names from where he sat, but the blue line's gesture was plain, north and east, not south and west. He made a small, private nod, like a person who decides to take a different aisle in a grocery store than the arrows on the floor suggest. When the next detour arrow told him to turn right at a 4-way where cedars bent like they had been trimmed by a careful barber, he went left. The pavement on this block changed from sealed black to concrete squares, with expansion joints in a neat rhythm. The truck's tires thumped a soft pattern you could count if you wanted. His headlights brushed a wooden street sign where the paint had seen a lot of summers. The name, which read Oak, had lost its K in the middle, making it look like Oa. He smiled once in the cab and kept going. The blocks here were shorter, the houses closer to the street. A dog came to a chain-link fence and decided to let the truck pass without any comment, which is its own sort of permission. He met an all-way stop where the cross street had a name that matched the emergency route flyer. The white letters on green were clean and new, and a blue reflector had been screwed to the post below, the way some places mark hydrants for firefighters at night. He put his left shoulder toward Ridge and let the truck ease to an angle past a parked pickup and the frame of a garden trellis. 2 blocks on, a sign he had not seen before stood on the corner. No base flowers. No pebble texture. A real estate-style signpost with a laminated page clipped under a plastic cover sheet. Flood alternate route in blue. A blue arrow pointed east. He took it, slow enough to be respectful of anyone who might be asleep on this street, faster than he felt like he was sneaking. The rain liked these blocks less than the other ones. It came finer here, a mist more than drops, as if it had thinned out by the presence of higher ground. At the edge of this neighborhood, a narrow road sloped toward a stand of taller trees, and then opened onto a 2-lane that did not wear any orange. No drums, no boards, no signs. It ran straight into a dark field as if someone had ironed it 10 minutes ago. He rolled onto it and checked his mirrors. The town fell back into collection of window lights and one blinking red at a radio tower. He added 5 miles an hour, and then another 5. Careful, the CB stirred. Westbound, you missed the arrow on purpose? It was a voice with no heat in it. A check-in more than a challenge. He considered not answering. He considered answering. His thumb found the mic, following the blue. Flood flyer in town says east to Ridge, then north. He let go. A beat. Then, copy, blue's older. It holds. The radio went quiet with a small, friendly fizzle at the end, as if whoever spoke had reached their intended exit in the air. He thought about calling back to ask who kept that sort of knowledge in their pocket at this hour. He didn't. He accepted the idea that some voices live just off the shoulder and have reasons to know things without showing a badge. The road ran for 3 miles uninterrupted, and then the rain felt different on his windshield, less about itself and more about the wind that pushed it. Ahead, a set of barricades sat slanted across the travel lane, but they were not the orange of construction. They were the white and red of emergency closure. Behind them, water filled the low place where the highway dipped to meet the old 2-lane at an underpass. The river had been allowed to speak up. He could see the orange detour on the far side, lights pulsing like someone drumming fingers on a table, patient and insistent. The central barrier glistened, clean and without scuffs, as if no one had bumped it. To the left, a gravel shoulder widened, then turned to a thin ribbon of county maintenance road that rose gently around the water's edge and returned to the main line above. A small wooden sign with white letters the kind parks use said overflow bypass. Trucks, one at a time. He sized it with his eyes the way drivers do. A geometry that moves through the mind quicker than a calculator. It would fit if he placed it slow and thought his way through the top of the trailer under overhanging branches. He eased onto the gravel, checked his trailer swing, and took the bypass with one hand on the wheel and one hand poised on the brake, not riding it ready. At the highest point, the water lay off to the right like a mirror someone had tilted. He could see the reflection of the arrow boards across the flood, amber waking and sleeping, waking and sleeping. It looked like another sky. Back on the main line, the route markers came in pairs the way they do when 2 highways borrow each other for a few miles. He headed west, back toward where his delivery waited, and he watched for another Leonard, for another tower, for another set of marigolds. They did not return. A state trooper eased up behind him and hung there for a mile, then pulled alongside, gave a glance that read professional curiosity, and moved on. The trooper's light bar was off. The rain calmed itself to lace inside the headlights, and then slipped away as if it had an appointment elsewhere. He rolled through a different town with a different water tower, this one with a faded mascot in blue and yellow, no marigolds. A diner sign in neon flickered in an uneven rhythm, as if somebody had tickled the method behind flicker itself. The ELD ticked his time down as expected. He would make it, with breathing room enough to be human at the dock, and not simply a machine. At the receiver, a forklift beeped politely. A man in a hoodie took his paperwork, and the loading dock lights blinked twice to signal they were ready. Out of habit, Hector asked the clerk if US 24 had been closed long. Since last week, the young man said, chewing on a straw and looking at his screen. They sometimes forget to take down the detour when the water's gone, but this time it's real. County keeps saying they'll add a second route, but they never get around to it. The clerk's tone held no mystery. It never does, in places where the job is making a clipboard line up with a trailer. A day later, on his way back east empty, under a sky that had decided to be bright, he took the same river route. The message board was dark. The floodwater had slid back where it belonged. He took the exit into Leonard not because he needed to, but because he wanted to see street names in daylight. The marigolds were there, cheerful, rocking slightly in a breeze. The mural with 4,109 still rode the brick wall, and the number still felt like a name. The bulletin board at the post office held the same flyer with the blue flood route line. In the light, he could read the date, printed 3 years ago, updated by hand last spring. A small note in the corner read, "For overnight detours, use Ridge." It hadn't been there 2 nights ago, not to his eye. Or maybe it had, and his headlights had not warmed the ink enough. Back on the highway, he pulled into a DOT yard he'd passed 100 times and never entered. He parked in the visitor's spot and walked into the office where a map of the county spread across one wall, roads drawn in color-coded lines that made you want to run a finger along them. A woman at the desk looked up with a practiced, kind expression that meant she had answered every variation on the same set of questions and still found some room to be nice. He asked carefully if they ran a night detour crew in Leonard. She tapped a few keys, glanced at a spool of printed work orders, and shook her head. "We stage at daylight and cover through evening when we can," she said. "Overnights? Only if a bridge closes sudden. Nothing on the books the last 2 nights." She paused, added, "TMA units aren't even out of the shed until 6. She said it without drama. For her, it was simply a note. Out back, on his way past the yard to his truck, he saw a row of aero boards leaned against a fence. Some were new bright housings, clean lenses. One, a little apart, had the older amber he'd noticed, and a scuffed sticker on the side with small numbers that meant nothing to anyone but the person who had assigned it to a crew once. 19 to 07. No extraordinary meaning, just a number. Rain had dried on its case in a pattern that looked briefly like a map. He let the thought go, because maps can be found in knotty pine and oil slicks if you want. He didn't tell the woman at the desk about the tripods that held their own paddles, or about the small voice on the CB that knew the blue route, or the way marigolds don't usually bloom in the exact same pattern 3 times in a row at midnight. He thanked her for her time, and she handed him a folded pamphlet, "Flood Safety, Know Before You Go, Just in Case." The pamphlet made a nice rectangle in his door pocket next to an old paper atlas. The atlas's pages had the soft dog ear of good use. When he rolled again that night, back toward the river, the road felt itself. The low place by the underpass held only puddles the size of dinner plates. A raccoon trotted along the shoulder and stopped to consider whether the truck was of interest and decided not. The sky, cleared, made room for a few stars, and somewhere, late-night country radio offered a song about a long drive to nowhere in particular. Weeks later, on a line through another state, the story of the detour rose over a table in a truck stop where the coffee stained the mugs in a friendly way. A driver across from Hector said he'd been sent around a flood once in a county with no staff on duty after dark. "Took the blue route," the man said, and tapped the tabletop with a fingernail twice, like knocking on a door to check what it's made of. Hector didn't press him on how he knew about the blue. Some knowledge feels like a jacket people pass around when the air turns, and you don't ask its brand when you're grateful for the warmth. Sometimes, only sometimes, when the highway message boards blink and the rain erases the distinction between 1 minute and the next, Hector watches for orange and follows it the way a person might follow lanterns set along a path for guests at a dusk wedding at a park. But if he noses into a town and the marigolds are too bright, and the water tower's letters wear themselves like a name spoken too many times, he changes his angle, takes a left where a right wants to insist, and looks for ridge or whatever word the flyer in that town has chosen to draw a blue line beside. He still trusts the folks in vests. He trusts the men and women who stand in rain to keep the river on the far side of a barricade. He also trusts that some routes are older than paperwork and still step up at midnight when they feel responsible for anyone heavy and harmless rolling through. Before sleep on some nights, in a quiet cab with the bunk curtain drawn to a soft edge, he hears sometimes the tick of cooling metal keep a sync with a ghost of an aeroboard's pulse, left, left, left. and he feels the sway, almost imagined, of the marigolds in a breeze that may be outside the truck, or maybe within the place where memory and the road keep their own weather. He is not afraid of that. He notes it. The way you note that a bridge flexes under load, he lets it be. He turns the ELD alarm down a notch so it won't startle in the morning. He sleeps. Story number 4. He took the Basin Road when the interstate went down to one lane for night paving, a long slant of asphalt that crossed a dry lake bed and then climbed to a line of mesas. His name was Rowan, a driver who liked empty places because they didn't ask for anything except attention. He hauled a box trailer light enough to make the tractor feel lively, the kind of load that lets the motor breathe without complaint. The weather was a textbook desert night. Air like clean glass, stars low and full, wind a light hand that pressed and then let go, as if it had better places to be. The detour had been straightforward at first, orange signs that meant, well, a slow loop down an interchange, and then the old U.S. highway, the one that used to carry family vacations and long drives before it ceded that job to bigger lanes. He settled in at a steady 60, the tires singing a calm song against the tar and chip, and let the world find its cadence. Far-off coyote yips that arrived like punctuation, a blinking red on a radio tower 6 hills away, a row of wind turbines on the horizon holding still like they were thinking. A billboard appeared and was gone. Hand-cut jerky, exit 12, with a cartoon steer that had seen brighter paint. He didn't need jerky. He adjusted his mirrors a fraction out of habit, a tiny ritual that smoothed the part of his mind that likes things square. The dash clock showed 12:41. Enough night left to feel like night. The first odd thing was so small, it almost didn't qualify. A green mile marker on the right shoulder flashed in his headlights with its numbers flipped, as if he were seeing it in a reflection. 17 read as L. 7. He frowned without feeling bothered. Lots of reasons for a sign to be wrong. Somebody mounted it backward, or it spun in the wind and the bolts didn't catch. He rolled past and watched for the next one. Green came again, crisp in the beams, and this one wore its numbers proper. 18, read as 18. The world had corrected itself. He let out a breath he hadn't meant to keep, took a sip of coffee from a thermos that tasted like 8 o'clock in the kind of diner that still makes coffee in glass pots, and kept the pace. A small brown sign for a roadside historical marker went by on the left. It had a silhouette of a pioneer wagon stamped into it, the kind of sign that says somebody stopped here once for a reason the road has mostly forgotten. In the distance, the black of the lake bed showed as a deeper black than the night around it. Basin floors do, that hold a shade that's several degrees bluer. A quiet ocean that remembers being water. The 2 lanes stretched across it on a low causeway. He could see the faint line of guardrail reflectors far ahead stand in pairs like patient sentries. The CB was on, volume low, a background companion. It chattered once with a couple of voices comparing night paving schedules up on the interstate, and then went back to a hush that sounded like the world breathing in another room. He thought about running a podcast, decided against it, and let the road be the only story worth listening to for a while. A green overhead announced a junction farther on with a name Rowan had never had reason to learn. The letters flashed backwards for a heartbeat, EVIHCRAM, then resolved as the truck drew closer, as if his approach had coaxed the sign into remembering how to read. He leaned forward a little, the way people lean when they believe it helps them see, and nodded to himself. Perspex and reflectors do strange things at night. He'd seen it all. He told himself that, at the start of the bridge across the basin, a pull-off hosted a closed visitor overlook, a little concrete pad with a shade structure, and a coin-operated viewer capped for the night. The sign by its drive read, Scenic Overlook, when he was past it. In the headlights, the reflectorized letters had read like a word cut from a mirror. Small stuff. A second sip of coffee. The rhythm of the joints in the bridge, thump, 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 set a metronome that matched his breathing for a minute or two. 2 miles out on the causeway, another oddness asked to be noticed. On the right shoulder, a white diamond sign stood on a breakaway post, the kind they use for temporary warnings. Ahead, the face was blank. In the mirror, it shouted, Return to mainline. The letters crisp, as if cut yesterday. He eased off the throttle very slightly and let the truck ask the road what it meant. There was no ramp, no crossover, Only the causeway and the soft, dark lake bed stretching to either side. The words faded as he drew even with the sign and then were gone, the way a song fades when you drive away from the radio playing it on someone's porch. Rowan ran a quick mental inventory. Fatigue, caffeine, eyes, windshield. The glass was clean. He rubbed the lower corner with a wrist, a small human gesture against something that didn't need it, and kept moving. Ahead, the guardrail reflectors blinked in a straight, loyal line. The stars looked very close. He noticed then that the reflectors behind him in the mirror held a different glow than the ones ahead. The ones behind burned steadier, as if their bead, those tiny glass spheres that send light back to where it came from, loved him a little more after he had passed. The ones ahead threw their light away from him, to the sides, to the dark. The thought came not as an answer, but as a question shaped like an answer. Maybe some things out here were meant to be read in reflection. The basin floor drew closer, the causeway dropping gently. It is in those moments, when a road changes only a degree or two, that drivers sense the shape of something they cannot see yet. The smell changed, less dry, more mineral. Not wet, but a memory of recent wet. The sign for the seasonal flood gauge appeared, a post with numbers in feet that told people in pickup trucks whether they would be wise or unwise. The numbers shone without care for who might need them. Tonight the zero line wore a dark smudge, and 4 inches above it a glint told of damp that had not yet finished drying. At the lowest point the road did what roads do. It pretended nothing had ever been wrong. A set of sawhorses sat folded on the shoulder with their reflective stripes turned inward. A sandbag leaned against one, slumped like a tired traveler. A small steel maintenance box next to the guardrail had a sticker on it that said, District 8 inches, a font no one had used in 20 years. Rowan's lights caught a silver rectangle ahead on the right. Another temporary sign, blank to the face. In the mirror, a message. Left lane, unserviced. Thy type, an old highway alphabet with the numbers thin and tall, looked like a note, left by someone who expected you to already agree. He checked the left lane. It looked perfect, smooth, slightly darker than the right. On impulse, on the kind of trust that comes from respecting instincts nurtured over years, he kept to the right. The next 100 yards made his choice feel less like a hunch and more like a conversation he had joined at the right moment. The left lane carried a sheen that was not water and not oil. It was the kind of gloss caliche gets when it's been polished by wind and then sifted by a dusting of very fine powder. It's not something that will spin a truck, not at this speed, not tonight. But if a person favored the right when the mirror suggested they do, it felt like politeness returned. He breathed, and the road breathed back in the shape of a small rise. Far across the basin, a pair of lights bobbed, not a car, not another truck. Boats sometimes ride shallow water after rain on playas before they realize there's no depth to hold them. He knew that. The lights flickered out as if someone had remembered a rule and obeyed it. Halfway across, the CB lifted as if a hand had raised a shade. Basin Bridge, you reading? The voice belonged to no one. He knew, a gentle, middle-aged sound with the friendliness of a hardware store clerk. He thumbed the mic. Reading. He didn't identify himself. You don't always, when you're not sure what you're answering. Stay out of the left, the voice said, unhurried. Skip the scenic turnout. He glanced at the scenic turnout sign coming up. In the mirror, scenic turnout wore an extra word. Closed. He hadn't seen that word in the front, facing face. There was no chain across the turnout. No orange cones. The shade structure there threw a triangular shadow across nothing. Copy, he said. He let go of the mic and watched the turnout slide past in a gentle pour of concrete. Something about the way the shadows layered there felt like a person had rearranged furniture for a party that had not started and then forgot to put it back. The bridge left the lowest place and began to rise, the way a breath finally leaves a chest. Rowan let the truck use that rise to settle again, to find its easy. He was not the kind of man to chase oddness down a hole. He was the kind who cataloged it, let it keep its own name, let it sit in memory with the other entries that had never hurt him. On the far side of the basin, the two-lane touched a cluster of buildings that had once been a roadside complex and had now graduated to an unintentional museum. A long, low building with a metal awning, a sign for a brand of soda that no one had made since cell phones came with antennas, and a glass case with dusty paper snakes coiled inside under a banner that claimed "World's Largest." The place was dark, the kind of dark that feels like it goes all the way through. Ahead of it, a small rest area took up a triangle of land with picnic tables under ramadas and a circle of gravel for turning big rigs. A single pole light ummed. A payphone blew, with a handset on a kinked cord, stood next to the restroom building like a person waiting on a ride that was late. He pulled in. Not to rest, not really. More to step out of the story for a minute and look at it from the shoulder. The tires crunched the gravel, the kind of sound that makes you feel located. He set the brakes, killed the lights, and left the engine on low idle. The pole light threw a pale circle where moths busied themselves. The air had that slight edge of cold that desert nights wear like a thin coat. The payphone rang. It made the sound payphones always make in movies because that's the sound they make in life. A pure, bell-like chime that counts like an old wall clock. He sat a moment, counted 3 rings, 4, 5. It rang 10 times and then stopped. He didn't get out for it. He wasn't a person who liked to step into a part that seemed to have been written for him without his consent. On the back wall of the restroom building, a bulletin board under plexiglass held a mess of notices: found dog, community sale, an old flyer about a meteor shower that had passed 3 years ago. In the reflection of his windshield, the board's flyers looked extra crisp, as if the glass did the same thing the road's reflectors did: send meaning back to the source. He turned his head. In the direct view, some of the ink had sun-faded to light brown. In the glass, the reds and blues were fresh. One sheet in particular held his eye: County Update. Playa Overflow bold letters, a map with a fat blue shape over the basin, and a thin line showing the causeway. In the direct view, the line looked plain. In the reflection, the line gained a squiggle, a bypass curving away from the low point and rejoining higher. He moved his head to test the trick. Direct. Nothing extra. Reflected. Careful advice. It felt like someone leaning in to say, low and kind, don't argue with the thing that knows how light behaves. He stepped out, boots soft in the gravel, and let the night put itself in his lungs. He walked to the bulletin board and put a hand flat on the plexiglass. Cool. His reflection met him. Cap. Eyes. The right amount of his own tiredness. The map on the page was, as the page had been printed, without a bypass. He tapped the corner of the glass. Something ticked inside the light fixture above. A bug doing its bug business. He angled his body so he could see both the board in real and the board in the reflection of his truck's side window. In the window, the bypass remained. A pale thread of a road sketched like a pencil line. He followed it with his eye and saw where it would join. A bend near a cluster of cottonwoods. A sign that said Fallon Cutoff in block letters. He had not seen that sign coming in. It might exist ahead yet. It might not. The payphone rang again, twice, then fell quiet. He walked to it because curiosity is not a weakness if you treat it like a tool. He did not pick it up. He stood close enough to see the little instruction card inside its plastic cover. The print was so crisp it looked new. Local calls 25 cents. A small, almost hidden line beneath read, if you need road conditions after hours. Dial 17. No area code. No agency name. No logo. A habit he had with phones took over. He pressed the cradle gently, listened for a dial tone, found one. He put the handset back. He was not going to call a number printed who knows when, with no promise attached. He climbed back into the cab. The clock said 19. He put a hand on the wheel and watched the moths circle the pole light like thoughts you don't need but cannot stop from coming. The CB burbled once. County update printed wrong, a voice said, conversational. Follow light. Past Fallon Cottonwoods. Take the split where the reflectors are brighter in your mirror. That's all. The voice had that friendly store. Clerk softness again. He pressed the mic halfway and then let it go. Appreciate it, he said into the cab air. Not broadcasting. He put the truck in gear. Back on the 2-lane, the world felt tuned. He watched the right shoulder markers as much as he watched the center line. Ahead, a small rectangular sign edged into view. White, with black lettering. Detour return. It would have said if it had any ink on its face. In the mirror, it read Cutoff ahead. The letters were tidy and understated, as if whoever printed them believed in doing their job without drama. He smiled once at no one. A cluster of cottonwoods rose from a wash, their leaves whispering that particular creek bed hush that says water might be under the sand. A narrow road cut left, its sign simple. Fallon Kutoff, the paint the color of bone. Its reflectors were generous in the mirror and shy to the eye. He signaled, checked, and swung onto it, letting the trailer choose a path that made sense to the tandem and not to any grand idea of geometry. The cutoff rose a gentle grade and then ran level, an old farm-to-market lane pressed into service for other things. He caught a glance, in the outer corner of his right mirror, of something on the main line where he would have gone if he hadn't turned. A slight ripple in the dark, a darker ribbon across dark, the way silt looks when a trickle of water has moved across it and asked tires to think hard about their choices. He was glad not to be thinking hard about it in the center of it. He kept the cutoff and let the truck feel proud in the small way machines do when they've been used appropriately. At the top of the cutoff, a guardrail curve ushered him back toward the old highway. The join came with a light bump and the new rhythm of the older road. He could see the causeway behind him now, a long straight line with a smudge at its lowest point, like a pencil line someone had thumbed while it was still soft. On the shoulder of the cutoff on his side, a wooden post held a green sign no larger than a license plate. In the mirror it read, "Thank you for using High Route." In the direct view it was blank aluminum catching starlight, nothing more. He met no other vehicles for a while, which felt like the road giving him time to readjust to the ordinary. The wind turbines out on the basin's edge turned slowly, their blades catching stray light and sending it back in flakes. On the far side, he joined the main highway that took him toward the town with the receiver. The interstate's orange glow returned to the sky like a city around a corner. He passed a way station dark as a closed eye, the sign above it unlit. His delivery waited in a warehouse that wore new lights and old forklifts, with equal friendliness. The man at the desk stamped a form, yawned in a way that was polite, took the paper with thanks, and had no knowledge of causeways or cutoffs. On his 30, Rowan sat in the brake lot and watched a recorded clip from his dash cam, curious and not expecting much, because cameras tend to make the strange ordinary the moment they turn it into video. He scrubbed to the basin and paused on the white temporary signs. In the direct feed, their faces were blank, as he remembered. When his headlights filled the mirror frame and the reflection the camera caught, the blank turned into a message, because the reflective film does what reflective film does. It sends light back to its source, and in sending, it holds the shape of the letters meant for that returning light. The camera caught a crisp line that had not been printed on the front. He stilled the clip and read it. "Keep right of center at low." It was highway talk, helpful and plain. The camera drew a thin crease between two worlds, one where instructions live, and one where they don't bother anyone who doesn't need them. He slept for a few hours in the bunk while trucks came and went in a wave pattern like a tide. In his tired mind, the reflectors did their work, sending meaning back, simple as breath. Dawn came with a pink stripe. He rolled east and caught the basin in daylight. The causeway looked ordinary. The sawhorses that had been folded on the shoulder were now upright beside a maintenance truck, their stripes facing traffic correctly, their purpose obvious. The seasonal gauge wore a new chalk mark at the 0. He pulled into the rest area because curiosity, among its other jobs, likes to check its own work. The bulletin board held the same flyer. The bypass line he had seen in the reflection last night did not exist on the paper. He angled to catch the board in the passenger window's glass. The light was wrong now. The sun gave him everything, without the trick of needing him to send it first. The bypass did not appear. A county pickup pulled in a woman in a safety vest, stepped out and clipped a fresh notice over the one Rowan had read in reflection. Overnight advisory, use High Route when marker reads wet at low. She thumbtacked it in 4 corners and smoothed it with a palm. Rowan lifted a hand. "That one last night would have been useful," he said, polite as he could be. She smiled in a way that said she'd heard every version of that sentence. "Printer jammed after 5, she said. "Sometimes the road does the job while paperwork catches up." She didn't say it like a riddle. She said it like a person who had learned to appreciate help where she found it. Back on the interstate later, Rowan thought about all the surfaces that only tell the truth when you look at them indirectly. Stars in water, sky in a window, paint under certain light. He bought a small round inspection mirror at a parts counter in a truck stop, one of those telescoping ones mechanics use to read labels in tight places, and stuck it near his dash with a scrap of Velcro. He didn't intend to drive by mirror. He liked not needing to. But he liked knowing that if the night became a language that preferred to be read on the return, he had a tool for that. Every once in a while, weeks on, when a detour leaned too hard on the plain facts and forgot to be clear, he'd tilt the mirror, check a blank sign's reflection, and catch a word the paint had not bothered with, a hint baked into thousands of little glass beads that return what they are given. And it felt less like superstition and more like respect. For light that knows where it came from. For roads that sometimes whisper instead of speak. For the kind of night that will call an old payphone not to frighten anyone but to see if anybody heavy and harmless is out there wanting to get across without trouble. Story number 5. She was moving a living freight that required the kind of steady hands you get only from long nights. A flatbed stacked with hives under a white net. The frames strapped and tarped just so. A mister rigged to keep them cool. Her name was Dina. She'd run produce, pipe, coils, everything a road could carry. But hauling bees in late winter was a different kind of careful. You traveled at night so they stayed calm and clustered. And you eased the throttle and the brakes as if you were teaching a skittish animal to trust your steps. The route threaded the low country where fog grows out of fields and irrigation canals draw long lines under the moon. Almond bloom was a week away. Orchards neat as graph paper on both sides of the road. Out here, county lanes ran straight, and the ditches murmured down in the dark. Frost fans slept above the rows like tall sentries, great steel propellers that would wake with a roar if a cold pocket dared sink. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and tractor grease, and a sweetness that didn't belong to anything you could see yet. The bees hummed through the cab like a note held somewhere between the engine idle and her own breath. It wasn't loud. It was present. "You'll feel them," an old beekeeper had told her on the phone when she took the load. "Not in your ears, in your hands. They add a vibration to the steering wheel like a low chord." He'd chuckled and added, "The first time it lines up with a power line buzz, it'll spook you. Let it pass. Don't spook back." The CB rode low on 19. Night drivers swapped mile markers for fog pockets, warnings about black ice up in the hills she wouldn't touch. Good news about a truck plaza keeping the coffee fresh longer than usual. Some nights the radio felt like sitting in a diner with everyone facing the same window. Tonight it felt like a hallway, where murmurs came and went. She took the farm road that cut between two canals, water black as a closed eye, reeds making small noises like secrets rearranging themselves. A sign with blocky county letters pointed to County 50 East. Another, older sign half buried in vines offered a name from a man who'd built these ditches a century ago. Her drop sat 8 miles ahead at a staging yard where forklifts would hum at dawn, moving hives into pickups that would carry them down orchard rows like gifts. A green overhead for the state highway flashed the town name mirrored for the brief moment before her beams caught it square. She let it go. Tonight wasn't about arguing with light. It was about staying smooth. The dash clock offered 1:18. She sipped coffee. The hum from the hive shifted a hair, the way a crowd's murmur deepens when a door opens somewhere and cooler air slides in. An orange-lit board over a county intersection blinked with a weather warning. Frost risk tonight fans may activate. Beside it hung a smaller, older light that pulsed a slow triple beat and then rested, then triple beat again. She'd seen those on frost nights before. They let night crews know when the wind machines were about to roar. Beneath the board, a narrow lane led to the Jasper Canal Bridge, a small crossway that barely deserved the name, a slip of asphalt over a concrete box culvert, and a wooden deck span just wide enough for one rig. Her GPS put her arrow on the route as if to say, "Yes, this one." But a barricade sat cocked to one side near the lane, not blocking it, but not welcoming either. Its striped face angled away. A sign on it read, "Road work shoulder repair," and a date from last week. No cones, no fresh gravel. The fog lifted in strips and set down again, slow as curtains. She signaled, eased toward the lane, and let the headlights sweep the bridge. There were, impossibly, 2 crossings. To the right, a low modern box culvert under a stretch of freshly patched asphalt, plain guardrail, everything square. To the left, 3 wooden timbers side by side, planks worn enough to show the curve of many tires, rails, just boards on posts. The kind of bridge that should have been replaced and had not quite been. The left-hand thing hovered half a lane apart from the right-hand thing, like 2 sentences that meant the same but had different authors. The bees' hum stepped up, a subtle gathering. The steering wheel picked up a vibration that had nothing to do with the pavement. It was the feeling a cello string gives a room when a player draws the bow near but not touching, sound almost but not there. Dina set the brakes just enough to hold herself back 2 seconds. She wasn't superstitious. She was patient. The CB clicked like someone tapping a microphone far away. Then a voice. If you're heavy and harmless, take the newer span. Left's for farm rigs that know it. Night makes it look pretty. The words slipped out matter of fact, the tone not unlike a person giving directions to a stranger in a grocery aisle. She reached for the mic and then stopped. The bee's vibration leaned left, as if their tiny bodies knew wood and didn't mind it. That wasn't logic. That was familiarity. She breathed, thought about weight distribution, thought about the invisible's moisture on timber, fog making slick what should be dry, the way a wooden rail looks sturdy until you need it to be. Her trainer's voice, 10 years ago, the man's cap stained from summer sweat, came to mind without asking, choose the option that insults your pride less if you're wrong. She chose right. The newer span took her tires like a welcome. The left stayed, in her peripheral vision, pale rails lifting into the fog, and then vanishing, like a path someone made to a different year. As she crossed the box culvert, the bee's hum settled back a half tone, as if satisfied but undecided. On the far side, another triple blink from a frost light rippled through the fog. When the wind machines start, their deep prop wash fills a valley like surf. For a half breath, Dina thought she heard it, then realized the sound was still asleep. She rolled on. The lane narrowed between orchards, branches trained into tidy walls, each tree painted white at the base against borers, a neatness that looked ceremonial at night. Reflective tacks on the stake posts caught her beams and threw single points of light back. If you blinked, those points looked like eyes spacing themselves as they watched. She did not blink. 2 miles ahead, the road jogged right then left across an irrigation siphon. A crude wooden sign with stenciled letters pointed toward East Grove Yard. Someone had nailed a reflector in the center of the O. In the fog, it looked like a small, round moon. The bees vibrated in the wheel again, a little less insistent. She leaned her shoulder down from habit, easing a knot out from a long day. The knot did not budge. At a crossroads with no stop signs, just courtesy, she slowed to a roll and watched the dark to the left. The orchard rose part there for a field lane. A bobbing glow moved through them. Not vehicle. Bright, smaller, soft. It could have been a headlamp, someone walking. It could have been a lantern. It moved slow and regular, as if a person with a purpose took care with their feet among hoses. As it neared the end of a row, it lifted and cleared the field road, and then settled back in no bounce, no sway, a straight line that said not handheld. A drone, she thought, a grower checking irrigation late. But there was no buzz above the bee's hum. The light disappeared as if someone turned their head and the beam swung away. At the next bend, a white board nailed to a post announced, Low Canal. In daylight, that'd be a joke. In flood season, the water rose right to the edge of the road and made a private pond for red-winged blackbirds. Tonight, the canal lay black and calm, a line of darkness deeper than the fields, and fringed with reed sheer. A single owl called twice, the kind of melancholy note that belongs to birds and brass. A sign ahead, be staging 1 mile a row. Another beneath it, no idle except bee trucks. The thought made her smile despite the hour. Somebody had gone to a print shop to get that second line made. She imagined the conversation and the person behind the counter saying, "We can put that, sure," and shrugging and doing good work. Half a mile shy, she saw glows through the fog to her right at ground height. Small, amber, steady, hazard lights. She slowed. A row of pickups sat nose in along a field road. Their beds were empty, lined with plywood cradles waiting to receive hives at dawn. A single white box truck idled, its marker lights on and body unbranded, windows dark. As her rig crept past, the box truck's hazards blinked once together and then went steady again, like the smallest wave. She raised 2 fingers off the wheel without thinking. No driver showed a silhouette. The bees hummed in a tone that touched the back of her throat the way winter air sometimes does. The staging yard gate yawned open, chain looped but not latched. A hand-lettered sign on cardboard warned, "Do not block tractor early." Inside the chain link, a dozen pallets sat under floodlights, that gave the fog a ceiling. A man in a green sweater and a beanie stepped from a lawn chair by a burn barrel. The barrel held only the ghost of heat. He lifted a hand, not a wave, just a held palm. She rolled to a stop and set brakes and let the motor idle smooth so the bees didn't wonder at sudden quiet. "You're early," he said in a voice trained not to startle bees or drivers. "Good." He had a clipboard, but it stayed at his side. "Take the left run by the water, back into 3 if you can from your side." He nodded toward a row of chalked rectangles on the compacted dirt, numbers painted in pastry bag script. She backed on the blind side slow enough to qualify as a lesson for a new driver. The yardman watched with his hands in his sweater. Pre-turns and post-turns. Small adjustments. When she centered, he gave the smallest nod and then spoke. Not like he was changing subjects, but like he had been waiting to finish a sentence that started much earlier on the road. "You took the new span." "I did," she answered, surprised and not. The old one looked. She didn't finish. She didn't have the right single word. "Pretty," he supplied with a dry smile. "They call it Jasper Left. Been closed to truck weight since before I was born. You can drive it with a loaded pickup and half your luck." He shifted his weight. "Sometimes at night it answers the fog wrong and looks like the kind you want. Sometimes the bees tug the wheel when you're near it." He pointed lazily at her flatbed as if to say, "They told you, didn't they?" "They hummed," she said. It felt silly and also perfectly right. He nodded like someone hearing a weather report. "They know wood. They'll hum for you if you aim wrong at Jasper Left. They'll hum worse if you commit. You can let them pick a radio station sometimes." He gestured toward the CB. "You hear anybody tell you which way?" His tone was neutral, a test without consequence. "A voice," she said, more to put a shape to it than to be believed. Said heavy and harmless, "Stay new." The yardman's smile went smaller, like a private joke landing in the place where it belongs. Old Boyd's been passing that line a long time. He's got a way of making sure nobody tips bees into the canal. We like him staying busy. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. He handed her a laminated sheet with a simple map of the yard and the orchard drop points and a big printed legend that read, "No fans near load coordinate with crew." His thumb covered a corner that held a penciled note. "If fog sings at bridges, ignore left-hand pretty." Her clock said 2:03. She unbuckled, checked her straps, and listened while the yardman showed her where Dawn would put trucks and pickups and how many frames each farm would take. The fog thinned to a higher layer and then settled back, tired of experiments. Somewhere in the orchard, a generator coughed a start and settled to a low, agreeable drone. A cat appeared from under a pallet and blinked once at her, and then vanished back into its commitments. She went to her bunk for a short sleep. The bee's hum pulled new lines through her dreams, not unpleasant ones, more like the smoothing of a crumpled paper. The world outside her curtain drew quieter in little drops. When she woke with her alarm, the sky behind the fog had paled. A half-dozen pickups had arrived, men and women in hats and hoodies with their hands in their pockets, their voices not rising above the hum. They moved with the confidence of people who know their altitude by the feel of air against the face. She climbed down and stretched and found the yardman pouring coffee from a battered thermos into paper cups. He handed her one, as if it had been meant for her the entire time. "Old Boyd take care of you?" he asked, casual. The way someone asks about rain that may or may not have fallen while you were asleep. "Seemed like he did," she said. She didn't look toward the road. She didn't need to. She could feel that Jasper Left existed in the same way you can feel your childhood street if you're close to it at night, present and shy. At the edge of the yard, a white box truck idled in the fog, marker lights soft. She watched it for a moment, thinking of her pass along the pickups. The hazard blink that looked like a nod. The driver's door opened halfway. No one stepped out, and the door eased closed, as if a decision had been made and then unmade. Her gaze dropped to her own boots. When she looked back, the truck was there, and not there in the way fog makes truth negotiable. She turned back to work because the day was arriving, and the hive crew would want the frames moved in good order before the frost fans stirred. When the forklift started humming, the bees changed their note. Not louder, not panicked, just different. People who didn't haul bees wouldn't have heard it. People who did would have nodded at the shift, as at a familiar song bringing in harmony. Dina guided the forks under the pallets slow, felt the weight in her shoulders, read the palms of the hive bodies the way a person reads the grain of wood. The crew said little. Their boots spoke enough on the dirt. By the time the orchard crews had pulled out, each pickup loaded with a small city of hives, the fog lifted to reveal a row of wind machines turning in a test run, their sound a long, rounded syllable. The yardman left the clipboard on a pallet and went to check a fuel tank. Dina climbed to her cab to note her hours and send her check call. On the dash, chalk dust from a delivery last month collected as a pale fingerprint next to her logbook. She hadn't wiped it. It made her think of someone saying, "Keep to the newer span" in handwriting, and her believing it. On her way out, after the yard had thinned, she took the county lane back toward the highway, curious to see the bridge with daylight behind the fog. Sun found the edges of things, making weeds shine as if someone had rubbed them with oil. At Jasper Canal, there was one span. The modern box culvert sat where she had passed, plain as ever. To the left, where the wooden timbers had hung in fog, a footbridge crossed for farm workers, narrow as a thought, and posted with a small sign. No vehicles, a sticker newer than the wood it described. Boards lay stacked nearby like ribs retired from work. The sight stirred something like gratitude, and something like the aftertaste of a bad idea avoided. She parked in the wide shoulder and stepped out and stood with her hands in her jacket in the cold that hadn't learned yet that the sun was up. A dragonfly, out of season and confused by weather or memory, zipped low across the water and made the thinnest of sounds. She listened harder than necessary. The bees in her trailer made no complaint. A faint chatter from her CB came with the sound of other mornings, other drivers' miles of practical small talk. Then, soft over the speaker, a man's voice, younger than she'd imagined for a name like Boyd, said as if to himself, "Heavy and harmless, keep the newer." The line landed like a penny dropped into a fountain. It didn't expect a reply. She didn't give one. Later, at a truck stop where the coffee tasted like memory and the cashier wore a lanyard full of pins from places she'd never been, Dina overheard two growers talking about bridges and fog and the strange ways bees will quiet when they've felt you make a good choice. "I swear they silence when you line up proper," one said, cupping his hands as if a hive could sit in them. The other laughed softly. "Or they get loud and you change your mind. Either way, they're ahead of us some nights." Dina rolled again that evening empty, light as a thought with a destination. The fog would come back after dark. Other drivers would take the same roads, look down the same lanes, feel the same small tug in the wheel when a left-hand pretty presented itself. Some would hear the CB say a single line, some would hear nothing. Most would choose safely because when you run at night long enough, you learn the mood of places. She turned the radio down and let her truck sing its own low note that had nothing to do with bees. Everything to do with being alive in motion at an hour when light and sound make different promises. Every time she came through that corner of the county, she scaled her patience to the fog and the season. Sometimes the old span wasn't there at all, not even as a footbridge in her eyes. Sometimes her beams found it just enough to try to make sense of it again. She didn't ask the yardman any more questions. Some help is offered with the kind of shyness that keeps it working, and gratitude does better in quiet. She drove, and if the hum in the wheel changed key where water ran under road, she took it as a nod from a living load, one that has crossed miles with people longer than people have been counting them. Story number 6. She crossed the high plains at an hour that makes the land feel bigger than maps admit. Her name was Inez, and she ran a westbound line of state road that took a straight shot through wheat stubble and pasture, then threaded a wind farm that had set its red warning lights to pulse together like a sleeping heartbeat. The trailer behind her held boxed flooring light enough to give the tractor an easy feel, heavy enough to keep it honest in the wind. The night was clear, the air dry. Stars sat close to the horizon as if a low ceiling had dropped over the world. There is a quiet to those miles that isn't silence so much as patience. The hum of tires, the low whistle through weather stripping, the occasional whisper of grass along the fence line. She liked it. She kept her speed steady, one notch below the limit, not because she was cautious for its own sake, but because a consistent pace made the engine sound like it trusted her. The CB rode low. Channel 19 toked, and every few minutes someone laughing about a coffee stand in the last town, someone asking whether deer were moving near mile 232. She sipped from a thermos and let the night do most of the talking. The first towers rose like pale columns out of the dark wind turbines in rows as neat as a parade. When you drive long enough around them at night, you learn their rhythms. When their red beacons flash in unison across a dozen miles, the pulses move through your chest like a calm, slow metronome. It's the kind of order that helps a person's hands live light on the wheel. She glanced at her dash clock, 12:52, then back to the horizon. The red came on, everywhere. Then went off, everywhere. A pause that felt like a breath. Then on again. She matched her inhale to the off, and her exhale to the on without meaning to. It made the distance friendlier. A message board farther on had posted halo testing low. Flying aircraft possible. Earlier in the week. Tonight. It sat dark. The only traffic was a pair of taillights way ahead and a milk run of headlights coming the other way once in a while, each one lifting over the soft rise of land and then tilting down as if bowing. Over the miles, the wind swung right to left and back again. Light hands on the trailer that left no bruises. At the first crest where the road joined the wind farm service lanes, a small wooden sign announced County 90 Maintenance Assess. Below it, a smaller rectangle read Authorized Vehicles Only. The gate stood open with a chain looped twice back on itself, not locked. Nothing out of place. Crews came and went all night in these parts, when storms were in the forecast, or when a gearbox needed attention. Halfway into the field, the pattern shifted. It was subtle at first. A set of beacons on Inez's right blinked early, a fraction of a second ahead of the rest, then came back into sync, then went early again. On the left side of the road, a string lagged a fraction. The effect was like watching a wave cross a stadium of people rising and sitting, a red ripple moving from one line of towers to the next. She watched it without alarm, curious, the way you'd watch a flock tilt in a new wind. She turned down the radio a notch and listened to the night behind the glass. The turbine blades whispered, a slow shush, shush, shush that came to the cab in a thickened version, like hearing the ocean at a distance through your own bones. A jackrabbit froze at the shoulder, ears backlit for a second, then vanished like a thought changing direction. The ripple repeated. A group of lights to the right flared early again, then the group next to them, and the next. The wave moved in a steady line toward a service road that cut off the state route at a diagonal. The younger drivers called those roads the lattice-thin tracks of gravel and crushed rock that let bucket trucks and pickups reach the towers without tearing up pasture. The lattice road coming up dove toward a line of stunted cottonwoods and a transformer yard that wore a chain-link fence with a coil of barbed wire along the top like a halo. Inez checked her GPS. The route stayed straight. No detours flagged. No closures. The odometer rolled the way it should. Her fuel was good. Her hours fine. Still, the beacons continued their early-late dance, as if pointing not frantically, not even urgently, just insistently, the way someone at a distance might lift their chin at a door to say, this one. The CB crackled with a different kind of sound, a wideband hiss that sometimes means you're sliding under a transmission line or that someone keying up doesn't have much to say yet. Then a clipped voice, not quite on 19's usual tone. String C, shift on a test. Give me a check. A second voice answered. C is early by a hair. I'm going to let it ride. Their accents were the kind you hear from people who work outside. Laid back, functional. Not truckers' wind techs, she guessed, talking over some service channel that had bled into her set because the night decided the frequencies should share a seat. County 90? The first voice asked. We've got a roadblock at 214 loose cattle. Sheriff setting. The reply was muffled, like a hand over a mic. 4 minutes out. Close it at the ranch gate and push westbound to the lattice if they come through before we finish. The phrase came out like a normal sentence in a normal life, and yet it settled on Inez's shoulders like an invitation, take the lattice. She lifted her thumb, touched the mic, then let it rest. She wasn't on their channel. She wasn't invited. She moved her hand back to the wheel, felt the neutrally quiet wheel hum that meant the road was even and the tires happy. The beacons rippled again, a visible suggestion. She breathed, made a decision the way she likes to make them. Simple and not dramatic. At the next break in the fence, a gravel throat leading into the lattice road, she set her turn signal and eased in, feeling the trailer's easy willingness to follow when guided gently. The maintenance access sign didn't scold, it simply watched, as signs do. The gravel was firm, a good crown, the kind of road that gets graded often because big money was built on it. Her headlights laid down a clean cone that lifted dust, just enough to make the world look like it had caught snow. The lattice ran close to the bases of the towers. Up close, they are less ethereal and more like ships. Massive columns, bolted flanges, ladders and cabinets locked tight. When the nacelles yaw in the wind, they do so with purpose, like an animal aligning to scent. The red lights atop them blinked their new non-unison in a wave that matched her movement, as if the ripple were staying one tower ahead, lighting a path. Ahead, a set of amber strobes flashed from low to the ground, the kind a maintenance truck wears. The pulses weren't urgent, they were patient, an alternating wink that said, "I am here," rather than, "Get over." She rolled toward them and found a white pickup parked at a utility gate, nose angled to the wind. The bed held a ladder, a toolbox, 3 traffic cones. No one sat inside. The hazards ticked and clicked, not entirely in rhythm with her turn signal. A small, pleasant syncopation. She eased past with care, gave the truck space, and noticed something small. The cones in the bed were clean. No mud, no dust. New or cared for. At the corner of the transformer yard, she could see the state road again. Far down it, a pair of white headlights glared too bright for a second as they turned to face her. Then a blue and white pattern took the place of the glare and settled. A sheriff's SUV had angled across the westbound lane with its light bar off and its takedowns on low. Behind it, what looked like a stock trailer stood with its back gate open against the fence. A dozen shapes moved in the diffuse light cattle. Slow, massive, not frightened, a little confused about the idea of a road. Ranchers in reflective vests, bright triangles of color in the pale, walked them with gentle hands and low whistles. There was no panic on the scene, only coordination in the dark. The beacons pulsed again, and the wave moved to the next string, the lights early in the direction of the lattice road that continued west to adjoin with the state highway past the activity. Inez had a childish urge to wave to the towers, then felt silly and let her hand rest on the shifter. She followed the lattice through a tight S where a stand of scrub waited to reclaim dirt after the next rain. Her mirror caught her trailer's running lights as they slid past the pale bases, small constellations in motion. The lattice joined the highway again at mile 216, a clean, safe angle with a fresh layer of crushed limestone and a standard green sign that read, "Lattice access authorized only," and, below it in smaller type, "Be prepared to stop." She paused at the join, though there was no reason to, more a habit of checking the world before you enter its center. Eastbound was clear. Westbound, the sheriff's SUV's lights were distant and soft. She rolled out. As her tires found the main line again, the beacons across the farm returned to their even, shared pulse. On, off, on, breathing with the land. The quiet that followed was not an absence. It was the presence of normal. At the next town, a set of lights under a name on a water tower that had been painted last summer, she pulled into a little truck stop that had kept up with paint and honest food. The convenience side was open. The diner side would open at 5. A pair of Wintex in coveralls, the color of good coffee, sat at a corner table under a sign that said, "No ladders in dining area" in handwriting, and laughed softly at something one of them had on a phone. Inez bought a sandwich that she filed under "will do," and a hot drink that surprised her by tasting like actual tea. On her way out, she paused at the bulletin board by the bathrooms. Notices for a church fundraiser, a lost dog, a farm auction. In the upper left, a printed page with a wind company logo. Night operations, lighting sync adjustment, it read. Under it, a line about isolated desynchronization of obstruction lights during testing hours. A note in bold, proceed with caution near maintenance access points. County may route traffic for safety. At the bottom, handwritten in pen, County 90 cattle this week. If you see a red wave, take the lattice slow. She smiled, not because the words were mysterious, but because they weren't. Somebody had thought to leave a simple line where drivers would see it. Someone else had added a kind of folklore wrapped in an instruction. Red wave meant the lights moving in a pattern, and the pattern meant a suggestion. A woman in a vest with grease on one cuff came out of the aisle with a pack of hand warmers and caught Inez's glance. "They look like they're doing tricks sometimes," she said, friendly without being intrusive. "We try to keep them together, but a few blink early when we're changing controllers." Folks on the county like to use it as a sign when they're closing a lane at night. Some drivers say it's helpful. Some say it spooks them. She shrugged. Just a tool. Inez nodded. I took the lattice. It was good road. The woman grinned. They graded every rain. Easier than pulling a stuck bucket rig out of a caliche pit. You did right. Ranchers will bring you pie next time for not putting your bumper into a herd. She said it like a promise that was half a joke and half not. Back on the highway, the night thinned by degrees. The towers behind pulsed in their calm tempo, and the ones ahead blinked in perfect time. She thought about how often guidance arrives dressed in things you were going to ignore, the way a blinking light can be decoration until the moment it becomes language, the way a voice on a radio can be chatter until a single line plucks your attention and tightens it like a string. At mile 239, a small pullout held a memorial cross for a ranch hand who had died years ago in an accident with a tractor, a quiet place with a ring of stones and a coffee can of plastic flowers that someone still refreshed. She touched 2 fingers to the wheel as she passed. Not superstitious, just kind. The CV hummed, then spoke with the friendly firmness that truckers use when they want to help without making a scene. Westbound by the farm, you're clear now. County's got him off the blacktop. Thanks for taking the lattice. It didn't say her name or her truck. It said enough. Toward morning, she parked behind a grocery warehouse where forklifts beeped like small mechanical birds. The dock manager wore a hoodie under a fluorescent vest and scratched a name on a clipboard with a pen that didn't want to cooperate. You see those lights out by the hills? He asked, as if continuing a different conversation. Used to think they were creepy. Now I use them to time my smoke breaks. He laughed once at his own small joke and looked down at his pen again like it might change its mind. Inez dreamed for an hour in the bunk. The dreams had red in them, not danger red, just the soft blink of lights across a field, moving in a wave that said this way in the language of blinking. She woke to a sky the color of unbelled denim and a line of birds that had decided to go somewhere together. The lane at the end of the yard lit up with the first forks flashing amber, and she rolled easy around him like someone walking around a person reading a book. Weeks later, in another state with a different kind of land, she told the story over a counter where the cashier knew the names of locals and the kind of coffee each driver preferred. The man beside her, older, hands like he had spent some winters fixing fences, smiled into his cup. They call that a herd light, he said, not making a big thing of it. Not official, just what the county boys joke. When it rolls, you follow it. They'll usually try to keep you out of their mess. Wind techs are good neighbors. Inez found herself checking the horizon differently after that. Not to depend on a wave of beacons to shepherd her, but to see if the land was in a mood to help. Sometimes the synchronized blink stayed synchronized, and the night was just a night, and that was enough. Sometimes, out where fences drew long straight lines and livestock shared their breath with the cold, the red would travel in that half-second wave. If she was alone and the lattice was good and the signs simple, she would let herself be led, slowly, with the confidence of someone who knows that a little cooperation between strangers at 1 a.m. can smooth a rough hour for everyone involved. She never met the voice on the radio that night. She never found the tech, whose cones were too clean in the bed of a white pickup. It didn't matter. She added the thought to the shelf she kept in a quiet place in herself. A collection of useful small things the road has taught drivers for as long as drivers have taught each other. Blink, blink, blink like a hand lifted, not waving an alarm but pointing in the friendliest way a machine can, and her tires wandering just where they should under a sky that has seen all of this before and will again. Story number 7. He ran the canyon road because the interstate up top had been shut for blasting until morning. His name was Jonah, and he liked the way old alignments wrapped around rock and river, how the turns asked for attention and gave it back in the form of calm focus. The trailer behind him held crates of lighting rigs for a stage show 2 towns over, balanced and strapped, not light, not heavy, just enough to make the tractor feel alive without strain. Midnight had slipped past quietly. The river to his right moved like ink under the stars. Signs warned of falling rock in that flat, matter-of-fact way mountain roads use, not to stir fear, but to establish a simple truth. In daylight, there would have been rafters at the pullouts and couples at the overlooks, and a store selling jerky that claimed world-beating and status. At night, there were only reflectors, the hum in the cab, and a ribbon of asphalt that had learned to hang on the slope like a careful thought. A mile before the narrowest stretch, a metal sign announced something odd for a canyon. Drive 45 to hear the song. He'd heard of roads with tuned grooves, rumble strips cut at intervals that play a tune when a driver holds the posted speed. A tourism trick, a bit of whimsy to keep people from rushing the curve. He smiled at the idea without intending to, because the night could afford a small joke. He eased to 45. The tires met the first set of grooves with a low musical vibration. Notes arrived not as melody but as suggestion, a simple pattern rising and falling. A tune that might have been meaningful in daylight to someone with a phone out and a laugh ready. To Jonah's ear, it sounded like a memory you can hum but can't place. He let it run its course, and then fall away as the road straightened and the grooving ended. The cab went back to its usual soft version of quiet. The canyon tightened. Cliffs pulled closer. The road followed the river's inner curve and then climbed the outer one. He lined up the headlights so they grazed the low rock wall instead of the river's black, the way he'd been taught. Up ahead, where the canyon pinched hardest, he saw the second sign. Drive 37 to hear the harmony. Somebody had had fun with this, he thought. He coasted down to 37 and met the next band of grooves. The tone that came up through his tires was different, a minor key, or the suggestion of one. The rhythm was not jaunty. It was measured. The notes seemed to space themselves with a patience that made his hands relax on the wheel. He could have laughed if laughter fit the space. It felt as if the road were asking for a very specific pace, in a very specific place, and rewarding him when he kept it. Half a mile later, wind tumbled through the canyon in a long, rounded gust and then stopped, as if a door had been opened and closed somewhere. The CB hissed along the bottom of its band. To his left, the rock face wore catch fences, steel mesh, and cables pinned into the slope to keep the small shrugs of geology from reaching the road. In his headlights, the nets were dull gray. In the dark above, he could just make out the pale scrapes where winter talus had dragged. The next grooved stretch arrived. He was already at the right speed. The notes emerged in a pattern that seemed to answer the first, not copying, but leaning on it, as harmony does. He held the line and felt the way the trailer settled behind him, a slight lengthwise sway as it matched his throttle. The notes carried him through an S-curve that otherwise would have arrived feeling tighter. In the rear view, something chalky puffed above the riverbank and drifted down. Dust, not much. The sort of foot-sized pebble kicks when it gives up its shelf. He didn't try to see where it had come from. Looking up invites more imagination than help. Halfway through the canyon, an overhead message board stood black. He had seen it lit earlier on a different night announcing the blasting closure. Now, it was asleep. The rock face beside it wore a smear the color of raw bread dough, the signature of a recent slide that had already been cleared. Cones with reflective collars lined that shoulder in a neat row and faced their stripes away from traffic, stacked on the safe side of the fog line. He let the speed climb 5 miles per hour while the canyon opened into a straightaway and then brought it back down as the walls leaned together again. The next set of grooves began sooner than he expected. His tires found them, and the tone brought another line, a lower hum that sat beneath the others. Not louder, just present, like a baritone joining a choir. The steering wheel carried the tiniest sympathetic vibration across his palms. It felt like an instruction that arrived without words. Steady here. Stay in the center. Don't hug the paint. The CB came alive in a quiet, practical voice. Unit 2 to Unit 3, rock sensors chirped at marker 21. You got eyes? Another voice replied. Dust only. Hold the board dark. Patrol's a mile out. We'll sweep after the passes. They weren't talking to him, and they weren't on his channel. The canyon had braided a few frequencies the way canyons do when air and rock decide to play with radio. He glanced at his marker. 21 slid past on his right. The groove melody finished, and silence returned so completely it felt like a friendly hand pressing down the air. He rolled into the narrowest chute of the canyon and saw, as his lights traced the inside wall, a stitched seam in the mesh that was newer than the rest-bright cable, clean clamps. Below it, fine gravel dusted the shoulder like flour. He took a breath he hadn't noticed he was holding, and let it out in a slow count that matched the length of the wall. The road felt like a thread in a needle, and he let the truck be the needle. On the far side, a small gravel pullout hosted a maintenance pickup and a trailer-mounted aeroboard folded flat. The pickup's hazards were on low, as if the driver had dimmed them out of courtesy. No one stood visible. A clipboard sat on the hood, the paper held down with a rock that had been given this job for a decade. smooth where fingers had touched it. As Jonah passed, the arrow board flickered once. Not a full flash, something settling in its circuitry, and then went dark again. The canyon opened. Trees gathered thicker by the river, their leaves making a sound like distant applause in the mild wind. He checked the mirror and watched the tight place recede, the way you watch a tricky bit of a job after you've done it well and feel your shoulders admit they were tensed. At the junction where the canyon road rejoined the wider highway, a trooper sat angled in the turnaround with his lights off, a dark shape that made its point without needing color. As Jonah eased by, the trooper lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in a gesture that wasn't a wave so much as a small acknowledgement of shared time in the night. Jonah returned it. He stopped in the next town at a cafe whose lights were always warmer than the hour required. The chalkboard listed soups they didn't have in summer, and pies they had all year. 3 highway workers sat at a back table with their vests slung over chairs, drinking coffee like medicine. One had a line of pale rock dust along his boot, where a cuff had rested. Blaster didn't like that seam, the youngest said to the others without lowering his voice. We'll go back at daylight and tuck it better. Saw 3 trucks go through on pitch tonight. All held the tune. The oldest smiled into his cup. That groove line's the best thing they ever signed off on. Folks complain about the song, but if you hit the harmony, you're where you should be when you should be. That's 3. Jonah paid for a slice of pie because the hour made that seem right, and because listening to other people's work talk felt like sitting by a stove. He didn't step into their conversation. He didn't need confirmation. He carried the tune in his shoulders, which was enough. Heading out again, the message board over the highway had woken. Rockfall possible mile. 2022. U.S. caution. The line blinked too fast, and then found a calmer pace, as if someone had set the timing by hand. He thought about how often a place seems to help carry its own responsibility when people have to wait on equipment and permission. He thought about the way a truck feels when it rides a groove you chose on purpose. By morning, he had dropped the lighting rigs at a loading bay, where stagehands in dark hoodies moved quickly and quietly like part of the gear. On his way back through the canyon in daylight, he looked at the signs again. Drive 45 to hear the song. Drive 37 to hear the harmony. And saw tourists pull over to make phone videos of their cars playing the tune. The road was the same. It was him that had changed. The tune felt less like a novelty now, and more like a decision you keep making for as long as needed. Weeks later, another night in another cut-through rock, he heard a different set of grooves sing their simple one-note warning, and found himself slowing sooner than the sign told him, letting the hum tell him where the truck belonged. In a diner states away, a driver with a silver beard said to anyone listening, "Those singing strips ain't for fun alone. If you match the low line at night, you'll be in the pocket when the slope lets go of the small stuff." No one argued. Some nodded. Some didn't. The night will always provide people who think you're imagining things, and it will sometimes be kind enough to keep helping them anyway. He didn't call the highway department to ask who had tuned those strips, or who had decided on 37 for the harmony, or whether anyone admitted out loud that certain nights the canyon seems to sing back. He kept the memory in the place where he kept the other useful oddities. Payphones that still give dial tone at closed rest areas. Chalk marks that tell you a good lane through a gravel apron. Red blink waves across a prairie that mean take the lattice. The road speaks different languages. Sometimes it uses notes. Story number 8. He took the timber road at midnight because the mill wanted a generator delivered before first light. His name was Malik. He'd hauled steel coils and nursery stock and prefabs, but tonight it was a crated diesel unit on a short flatbed, strapped and chalked, heavy enough to keep the tractor honest. The paved state route ended at a green gate where a sign in white block letters read, "Logging Road Radio Channel 7. Call your miles." Another, older sign below it warned, "Slow to turnouts, sound horn on blinds." Someone had stenciled mile numbers on slices of cedar nailed to trees, 1 through 18, up to the ridge and the mill. Fog hung low between the firs, like breath that hadn't decided to move on. The gravel under his tires sounded like dry beans rolling in a big tin, a steady, reassuring rattle. He switched the CB to 7 and turned it up to a level that kept him company without filling the cab. The first mile marker slid by a cedar round, with the number burned into it neat and dark. He thumbed the mic. Empty tractor. Flatbed, mile 1 up, slow. His voice sounded like it always did at this hour. Careful and unhurried. A soft reply came almost at once, like someone standing behind a curtain and speaking through it. Loaded. Coming down. Past 5. Hold to the outs. The tone was friendly. Matter of fact, he imagined a log truck with a short logger, chained and heavy, easing off the mountain. He pictured the turnouts, knew where they would be from the map they'd given him at dispatch, little gravel pockets, cut into the bank at intervals. He eased toward the shoulder of the first one anyway, checking the edge with a glance and a feel for whether the gravel had been recently graded. It had. He rolled past without stopping. At mile 3, a wooden post had been caught by a bumper sometime and leaned at an angle that looked like a shrug. The road narrowed under a rock outcrop. He sounded his horn one short, too long the pattern the sign had suggested at the gate. The horn came back to him in a blunt echo that made the canyon feel rounder than it was. Empty up. 3. He called. The radio answered with a crackle, then a man's voice. Loaded down at 7, long bunk holding the notch. The phrasing was old school. A long bunk meant older trailers, extra length. Malik pictured the driver taking the big turnout at the hairpin they called the notch. He put his foot gentle on the throttle and told the CB, "Copy, I'll tuck at 6. He knew from the map that the turnout there was generous. He didn't mind waiting. Waiting is a skill like any other. At mile 5, the firs tightened their shoulders. The fog pressed a little closer. Close-grown trees drip in fog even when it isn't raining, and the sound of those drops on his cab roof made a gentle ticking like a wristwatch somewhere under a pillow. He rolled into the wide turnout at 6 and set the brakes. Headlights off, hazards on. He left the engine idling low so the generator didn't feel the vibration shift too fast. He sat with his hands on the wheel and listened. In the distance, down canyon, a low engine note thickened the air. A truck with weight. Engine brake a whisper. Tires granular in the gravel. His headlights picked the fog into a private room. The log truck arrived like a black shape made of reflective tape and exhaust plume, bar rack and bolsters loaded tight and tidy. The driver's window was down. A hand came out in a small salute. Malik lifted 2 fingers in return. The other truck glided by, the cab lights showing the interior clean dash, a thermos tucked into a holder, a lucky ribbon hanging, red faded to rust. "Thanks for the tuck," the driver said on 7, slow and local, vowels warmed by the region. His taillights drifted away and got swallowed by a bend. Malik pulled back out, set his speed to the pitch of the road, kept his microphone where his right hand could find it without looking. "Empty up, 7.5, he said, a little late on the etiquette of halves, smiled at himself for being new to this particular dance, and kept moving. At mile 9, the mile round on the tree looked newer than the rest. Lighter wood, the number burned in darker. A tiny scrap of flagging tape hung from a branch above it, orange as a piece of fruit. A crow complained once from somewhere overhead. The CB, calm as a kitchen radio, spoke again. "Loaded at 10, coming to the outside. Sway on the crib wall. Watch your line, Malik." He froze a fraction, and then let the breath out. The voice had said his name. He hadn't given his name on 7. Out here, names get swapped later at mills and scales, over signatures and coffee. Maybe dispatch had called up. Maybe the voice was someone from the yard listening on the road channel. He pushed the mic button. "Copy," he said, keeping it neutral. "I'll meet you at the crib." The crib wall was a line of stacked timbers backing the outer edge of the road at a hairpin, shoring the bank against the weight of trucks that all favored the same arc. His map had a circle drawn around that corner, and a little note in tidy handwriting. "Wide swing, watch your tail." He eased into a turnout just before it, letting the trailer straighten so the swing would predict the future he wanted it to have. In his mirror, he saw him a long, low log truck, with the kind of patina you only earn by working ever since. The driver brushed the hairpin wide with a motion so smooth it felt choreographed. As the hood came even to Malik's cab, he saw the driver's face for an instant shadowed under a cap, eyes forward, mouth almost smiling, the way a person's mouth takes on patience when their hands have done a thing 1,000 times. "Appreciate the hold," the radio said. It was the same voice that had said his name. For the first time, Malik noticed something about the sound of it. Not old, exactly, but worn. the way leather sounds different from vinyl when it rubs. He had the sudden impression he was listening to a recording that hadn't been a recording when it was made. The truck eased past, bolsters whispering against the straps that cinched the load. It rounded the bend and climbed down canyon like it had always belonged to that slope. Malik pulled out, took the hairpin slow, watched the trailer tires flirt with the dirt by the crib, and then mind themselves. Above, the fog thinned for a breath and revealed stars punched through in small, bright stabs. Then the drift covered them again as if embarrassed. Past mile 12, a wooden bridge took the road over a slide scar where the ground had given way months back and been rebuilt. The bridge had guard planks polished by tires and a sign that said, "One at a time" in letters someone had painted by hand. He radioed, "At 12 bridge, empty up," and waited for a heartbeat. Silence. Then the friendly voice, "All yours." He took it smooth and felt the boards answer under him, not in protest, just conversation. On the far side, the mile round at 13 had a faded ribbon tied to its nail, blue turned to ash by sun and fog. He thought of names and radios and whether the driver who had called him had known him in some other life of the road. He had changed companies twice. He had taken a long break once to try a desk job and found that he missed the way miles accumulate like quiet mail. He couldn't remember meeting anyone with that voice. "You working the mill tonight?" he asked into the mic, not pushing, just asking. The hiss answered. Then, "We'll be around." It wasn't an answer. It was something like a promise not to explain. The timber thin near the top. The road widened enough to let a pickup and a semi talk without raising their voices. A chain-link perimeter appeared with a swinging gate and a lit sign. "Ridge mill check, in P. Required." Beyond it, a line of sodium lamps made a soft fog of light. He called in. "Empty up at the mill. Generator delivery." A younger voice met him. "Bring it to Bay 2, we'll flag. Road's clear for you the rest of the way." The voice wore fluorescent light even through the speaker, brisk and awake. As he rolled through, a security shack leaned in the glow. A framed photo on its inside wall, visible through the open door, caught his eye, a black and white shot of a log truck angled on that cribbed corner, the driver standing beside it, hand on the fender, a cap with a logo no one made anymore. Someone had placed sprigs of fir under the frame, dried and flattened by the edge of the glass. A small brass plate at the bottom read, "In memory of Owen Red Larkin, for calling your miles and getting us home." The mill yard men had him square and backed onto timbers in 3 slow motions. Forks picked the crate. He felt the weight leave him with relief that felt like a friend leaving the couch to stretch. Paperwork took a minute, names traded, signatures made. The young checker pointed with his chin toward the photo on the shack wall when he saw Malik's glance. Red used to call his corners. So clean it was like a metronome, he said, writing without looking up. Folks say he still does on fog nights when someone new comes up alone. Old-timers won't say it that way. They'll say they heard somebody helpful. He smiled without teasing. "You hear anybody helpful?" "Somebody told me to hold 6, Malik said, casual, like saying it was the same as saying it was cold. The checker nodded. "Then that's just somebody helpful." By the time Malik angled down the road, dawn had pulled the fog into gray rags and hung them in the underbrush. The cedar rounds with numbers looked less like talismans and more like practical chores someone had done cleanly. He still called his miles on 7, because that was the way of it, and because habit becomes courtesy faster than you realize. "Empty down at 9, he said. The radio was quiet. At 7, he made the same call. Silence again. He kept making them anyway. Near the crib wall, he eased into the turnout to let his own history catch up with him. On the bank above the crib, where the fog had burned back, a single piece of flagging hung, orange and new, tied in a square knot around a sapling. Below it, in the dust where trucks swing wide, clear tire marks traced arcs that matched 1,000 others. He put a hand on the wheel with a small feeling of gratitude for the way hands learn shapes even in the dark. At the gate, another semi came in a fuel tanker heading up to fill yard tanks. The driver held up a hand. Malik returned it. The tanker keyed up 7. "Heading up at 1, he said. A beat later, a voice that wore patience like a jacket offered, "Copy, meet me at 6, Bridges single." The tanker driver glanced at Malik with a question in his eyebrows. Malik smiled without teeth and said, "He's helpful." The tanker nodded once like a man agreeing to something useful and drove on. Back on pavement, the day caught him like a warm coat. He stopped for coffee at a diner with a logging mural and a bulletin board full of notices. One flyer announced a memorial fun run named for an Owen Larkin. The photo was newer than the one in the shack. A younger face under the same cap, grin a little wider, a dog at his boot. Someone had taped a small piece of cedar next to it, with the number 6 burned into it. No explanation. It didn't need one. For a while after, whenever he ran roads with radios posted, he treated the voice that tells you what's coming as a piece of the place, as credible as a mile marker and as humble as a horn in fog. When he took the timber enough times, he learned the calls from the mouths of living drivers and the etiquette of waiting in the right places for the right reasons. But on nights when the mist pressed in thick and the trees made a room out of the world, he would sometimes hear, through the CB's soft hiss, a tone, not a word, not yet, that made him click the mic and say his mile a half-second sooner. And if someone replied in a voice that sounded worn and familiar without being remembered, he felt the kind of comfort people feel when they realize a road can be an old neighbor, as well as a line on a map. Story number 9. He took the prairie route under a sky that sounded like it could hold thunder later, though for now it was only dark and immeasurably wide. His name was Lyle, and he was hauling palletized flour to a bakery that liked its deliveries before dawn. The kind of place where the first shift walked in with sleep still on their faces and left carrying bread. The highway he favored was simple, a straight black ribbon between corn stubble and Milo, with telephone poles ticking by like metronomes. The air had that clean, spare chill that turns breath into a small cloud when you step down. Just past midnight, he left the bigger road and took a county blacktop that crossed a branch line twice in 5 miles. Quiet zone signs marked the crossing's no train horn. A blue emergency placard shared a pole with the red lights, listing a DOT number and a call-in for problems. He always noticed those little blue signs because they put names to intersections the way people wear ID badges: polite, official, and a reminder that a quieter thing has systems watching. His CB was on, volume low, catching the occasional weather check and the chatter of 2 drivers on the interstate debating which fuel station had the friendlier night cashier. He didn't have a scanner for railroad traffic, though he'd heard plenty of detector voices in his time. Those flat, careful announcements that sounded like a machine reciting a grocery list. Milepost, temperature, axle count, no defects. The first crossing was empty of everything but signal poles and the long, polished tracks that moved on into the dark. He rolled slow and even, the trailer whispering agreeably behind him. The second crossing, County 7, sat near a stand of cottonwoods and a shuttered feed store that still had a faded ice sign in the window. As he approached, the flashers began their slow, alternate pulse, red on red, and the gates dropped before he had time to even think about coasting through. Not that he would have. He stopped with familiar distance to spare, set a light foot on the brake, and let the engine idle. He waited for the light of an approaching locomotive. A minute slid past. Then another. The red washed the road, the trees, the aluminum grain bins across the ditch. Somewhere far to the west, there was a gray flicker that meant lightning a county away. Lyle watched the horizon for a headlight that didn't appear. He listened, expecting the tremor of a train in the rail, a subtle sound that often arrives before sight. Silence held, patient and complete. His phone had 1 bar. He glanced at the blue emergency placard on the signal pole, its DOT number crisp, despite a decade of sun, and thumbed the crossing hotline. The call whirled and settled and asked for the number. He spoke it. A recorded voice thanked him and said a dispatcher would be with him shortly. The line clicked, and the connection salt and peppered, and then cleaned. Before a person answered, his CB made a different kind of noise, a square, clipped tone, like a metronome clearing its throat. Defect detector, milepost 8 to 8.2, a flat voice said through his speaker, as if it belonged to it. Track temperature, 4 to 2. No defects. Total axles, 2, 8, 0. The detector voice didn't come from any of his channels. It simply stepped into the cab like a polite thing that assumes it's part of your life. The numbers meant a long train somewhere in the district, not necessarily this crossing. He hung between worlds for a moment, phone against his ear waiting for a person, radio handing him a machine that didn't care if anyone listened. A car pulled up behind him and turned off its headlights, leaving only parking lights on, a soft courtesy that made the red flashers look brighter. After another minute, a headlight finally glowed to the south, a coin of white between two cottonwoods. It seemed to hang there, not gaining. Then, all at once, the beam broadened, and a string of covered hoppers eased into view, whispering along. They weren't fast. They weren't slow. They were steady in the way a moving line can be steady. Their wheel squeal was barely anything at all, a cat in another room. He watched the cars pass, counting without meaning to. Graffiti slid by names, shapes, owls and crowns, the kind of night art that looks somehow gentler under red lights. R-Box 197264 went by. 2 cars later, R-Box 197264 went by again. He blinked. Different dirt, same number. He smiled at his own need to make patterns and decided that 2 cars from different cuts might share similar marks. Then he saw another owl in a crown, almost identical, the paint fresher than it had any right to be. He looked at the wheels, at the little white cot stencils, at the chalk marks on the side sills, the tiny notes rail workers leave for each other. The numbers repeated once more, then changed. The mind fixes on what it's given. The cars kept coming. The end never presented its red markers. He breathed into a patience he knew well. He glanced at his ELD. Time was still fine. He could wait and still make the dock with enough to be human. His phone lay quiet. The hotline had gone to hold music, and then to silence. The CB popped again, small and matter-of-fact. Train 2-1 is sitting across County 7, a different voice said on a tone he didn't pick. Crew stopped for a test at Viola. Defect detector repeating. County notified. A second voice came through, this one rounder at the edges, as if it had been worn smooth by years of late nights and polite copybacks. Westbound with Flower at 7. You're fine to take Elevator Road north and cross at the flyover. Keep it slow. Center your weight. It's posted for 80,000. The voice made it sound like offering a chair. Lyle touched the mic. Say again for the westbound. He didn't give name, company, nothing. Elevator Road, the voice repeated. Take it 2 miles north. 1-lane flyover past the old co-op. Signs will make sense when you see them. Dispatch is trying to clear the crossing. Might be a bit. He glanced in his mirror at the car behind. The driver, an older man with a ball cap, shrugged in that way that says, either road is fine for me, no hurry. No other traffic pressed. Lyle set his signal, pulled out and away from the gates, turned right at the nearest wide bay used for equipment turnarounds, and doubled back to the last intersection. He took County 12 north. The road narrowed by degrees, hedged by locust trees whose thorns glinted when the red flashers washed them. Elevator Road announced itself with a faded green sign and a row of salt-stained concrete silos that rose like cylinders of moonlight. The co-op office had a single light on over a coffee maker and a calendar page showing a tractor from a year, not this one. Beyond the office, the road bent and lifted, and a 1-lane steel flyover presented itself, a through-truss bridge built when corn was smaller and trucks less heavy. A newer placard had been bolted onto old steel. GVW 80,000 OK single lane yield to oncoming. Another sign added. Sound. Horn. At. Crest. He rolled to the approach and paused, listening. No engines, no tires on gravel. No distant or near horns. The rails below the flyover gleamed with a little frost, their line arrowing away under the bridge toward County 7, where the red flashers still painted the night. He tooted the horn, short and friendly. The sound came back from the steelwork with a gentle doubling that made the bridge feel like company. He eased onto the deck, centered, and found the sweet spot where the tires sang a quiet note and the trailer settled square. The truss members framed the sky in triangles. For a second, he felt like he was driving through a drawing someone had done with a ruler. Halfway across, a great horned owl left its perch on a beam and glided down and away with the deliberateness of a thing that knows its night. Lyle watched it go and kept his speed encyclopedic, not slow enough to tip the truck into a sway, not fast enough to make the deck a drum. On the far side, he nosed down off the bridge into a gravel apron behind the elevator and back onto county blacktop. The rails ran alongside to his left. The long line of hoppers continued to creep, slack clacking, a snake that refused an end. Whatever locomotives powered the movement sat beyond a curve. The crossing at this road stayed open, gates up. He took his right-of-way and followed the blacktop back toward the main route. The CB carried the detector voice again, as if to narrate to no one in particular. Defect detector, milepost 8 to 8.2. Track temperature 4 to 2. No defects. It sounded like an apology. Then, from the other speaker tone, the worn, round voice. Good call on the flyover. See you on the backstretch. Westbound. Lyle didn't answer because some courtesies are best accepted without making them bigger than they are. He made the bakery with time to spare. The dock light flicked on as he angled into place. A man in a hoodie with flour on it came out with a clipboard, rubbed his hands, and grinned with the warmth of someone whose day starts when other people are ready to quit. You beat the train, he said. They love to park on 7 when we need you most. Old elevator bridge still holds? Lyle nodded. The man poured him a coffee that tasted like something shared on purpose and pointed him to the break table. After the unload, with the sky thinking hard about a color, Lyle rolled back through town and aimed for the interstate. When curiosity is practical, it earns its keep, and he turned toward County 7 instead, wanting to see the crossing in morning. The gates were up. The tracks were empty as far as he could see. The blue emergency placard was bright with dew. He parked a safe ways off, hazards clicking, and stepped down for a minute, the cold clearing his head. A meadowlark tried on the first syllables of its song and stopped, reconsidering the day. From the line of trees came a small, squared sound as if a speaker had woken. Defect detector, milepost 8 to 8.2, the flat voice said. And then nothing, a stutter where the rest of the sentence should have been. It didn't repeat. The silence that followed felt embarrassed, and then it was just wind again. He climbed back in, not interested in stitching meaning where none had been promised, pulled onto the lane, and let the road turn itself into miles. At the next truck stop, he topped off and walked inside to pay. A rail buff driver in a cap with a patch read Hotbox Hunter half funny, half true, stood at the coffee counter arguing gently with a cashier about which line ran through the county. Lyle asked the man if detectors ever looped. All the time if they hiccup, the man said with more affection than annoyance. Sometimes the radio carries them where you don't expect. They'll tell you a whole story about axles you're not even going to meet. He looked at Lyle's hat, saw flour dust, and added, If you hear no defects twice, take it as a blessing and keep it between the ditches. He laughed at that because it was good. He paid, tipped, nodded to the cashier, and stepped back out into air that had traded its raw edge for something softer. A train horn blew a long, proper warning 3 miles south where the quiet zone ended, and the sound ran up the fields like a line being drawn right where it belonged. After that night, Lyle kept Elevator Road in his mental atlas. In the same neat place he kept a certain lattice across a wind farm, and a blue route through a flooded town, and a high route over a basin floor. He still stopped for every gate. He still made the calls on the blue placards when he needed to. He didn't try to pick out the voice that had shepherded him from the stack of 100 voices that live on the CB at midnight. He let it be part of the landscape the way a weather vane is part of a barn. Some nights, far out on routes that had nothing to do with County 7, a detector voice would step into his cab uninvited and tell him about axles and temperatures and defects or their absence, and he'd listen with the same quiet courtesy he gave to rain tapping a pattern on the sleeper roof. The ghost of a graffitied owl in a crown might show up on a boxcar in a different state and make him smile, a small hello from one line to another. If red lights caught him again and the gates came down and a long train decided to take its time, he waited if that was the right way to wait. And if a voice suggested a flyover, in a tone that sounded like help wrapped in patience, he considered it with care and took it if it felt true. Between towns where bakery steam curled into a dawn that looked like bread, he drove and kept his clocks honest, and the prairie kept its own clocks flashing red, flashing white, lightning far off, talk on the radio that sometimes wasn't for him and sometimes was. If the sky finally brought its thunder, it did so with a sense of schedule. If not, the night still did its work, that soft kind of chore that leaves a line of taillights briefly on a flat world and then lets them be gone. As the engines cool and the night settles in, remember some stories don't fade when the headlights dim. Out there, beyond the reach of the dashboard glow, the road still whispers, carrying the echoes of what we've heard tonight. If you've stayed with us till the end, you've earned your place among the fearless few. Don't forget to like this video, share your own eerie experiences in the comments, and subscribe to The Sleep Haunt, where every mile hides another secret in the dark. Sleep well, if you can.